It's election night in America, and you're watching a special edition of The Story Is. I'm Alex Michelson, live in Los Angeles. Tonight, the top story is what's happening across the country. Some races have been called, projections have been made, but we are still awaiting the results of a very close and very important race in Wisconsin. We're talking about the battle between Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong and Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. They are both up for the state's Democratic nomination for governor. Just a slim margin of votes between the two. Crowley up right now, 3,141 votes. He's at 40%. She's at 39.5%. We're seeing a lot of money spent here. All this to take on Republican Tom Tiffany, who's advancing to the November election. He's a congressman who's running for governor. Hong spoke to her supporters a short time ago, which we showed you live in the last hour. The Story Is.
When our neighborhoods and our neighbors are disappeared by uncontrolled ICE fascists, it's Tom Tiffany who shows up in support. And while he's doing that, we are fighting for hope. We are fighting for the freedom to show compassion to one another and to show care for the people around us.
An easier call to make in Minnesota, where CNN projects that Senator Amy Klobuchar will win the Democratic primary for governor. She's seeking to take over the office from outgoing Governor Tim Walz, who abandoned a bid for a third term because he's very unpopular in his state. Let's bring in my panel now. Ron Brownstein, CNN senior political analyst and an opinion columnist with Bloomberg. Democrat Katie Porter served in the U.S. House and ran for governor and senator here in California. And Matt Klink is a Republican strategist as well as the owner and president of Klink Campaigns, Congress member as the Democrat here who has run for governor before. Your thoughts on what's going on with Francesca Hong, why she may not be up, even though a lot of the polls indicated that she was supposed to be?
Well, I think polling has gotten much less reliable. I think we've seen that across the country. And the thing that people miss about polling is increasingly people who will actually pick up the phone or will actually fill out a poll are kind of weirdos. You're sort of polling weird people. Normal people
I always accept
decline the call. Listen, I always do them too.
I think you have so much power. You have more power if you answer a poll than you do voting.
We're up at 10 o'clock in the night talking about this election at 1 o'clock in the morning. We are election weirdos,
yes,
Alex.
We
It's
are.
okay to say that.
I definitely am a weirdo.
I think there's a lot of polling error. I also think Francesca's campaign was interesting because she, I think, rode some of the buzz of Abdul al-Sayed, but she doesn't actually have the endorsements. I mean, not having AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not having Bernie Sanders, not having Elizabeth Warren. These were people who came in a meaningful, early, and consistent way for both Abdul and for Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota. And so I actually think in some ways, the fact that Francesca has put this all together and is in this narrow of a margin, kind of all on her own, is pretty remarkable.
What did they not see in her?
Well, but some weird stuff came out. I mean, to talk about Thanksgiving being, being colonial oppression and being anti-Valentine's Day. Sounds like a woman scorned, just she didn't want to celebrate it. But, I mean, you hear all these weird things, and then she started to backtrack on some of her socialist views while still saying that she was a democratic socialist. I mean, I don't think she's really comfortable in her own skin right now.
And to her point, I'm sure she had never experienced anything like what she's experienced in the last few weeks, when the entire national media shows up, goes through every tweet she's ever posted, and turned her into a caricature.
And well, look, and the backdrop is, for anybody who's voting in a Democratic primary anywhere in the country, Donald Trump is an existential threat to everything they care about. And in that environment, electability and viability and plausibility, it matters a lot. It just matters a lot. And you have Tom Tiffany, someone, as I said before, he moved to overturn the votes of his own states in 2020. The implications of him being governor in 2028 for Democrats are really significant in terms of Wisconsin, one of the core swing states, and what he would certify or not certify. You know, the governor has a role in it. Now, there's a Democratic-controlled state Supreme Court that might, but nonetheless, I think for Democratic voters, the Trump era is not a time to take a flyer. Now, there are legitimate disagreements about what is the best strategy, and I think we saw that in Michigan, whether Haley Stevens or an Abdul El-Sayed would be a stronger candidate. But the fact that Sanders and AOC and Elizabeth Warren and others stayed out, as the Congresswoman said, was an indication that there were not a lot of voices in the Democratic Party who thought that she was a strong general election candidate. And if she does somehow get over the top with these last few votes, there's going to be a tremendous amount of anxiety. It's a whole different order of magnitude than Abdul El-Sayed, which is enough anxiety.
She's pretty green. She's pretty young. But I have to say, I have to go back to the fact that David Crowley did not light the world on fire.
No.
I mean, talk about falling uphill. I mean, he must have a bump on his forehead, falling uphill potentially into being the Democratic nominee and probably governor here.
I mean, it kind of reminds a little bit of Javier Becerra, who was running in the Democratic in the race here in California. Kind of right place, right time, right? And sometimes being lucky is important.
And Democrats felt like, in the end, you know, they felt like he had the best chance. It's all they wanted, right? Democrats wanted someone who would just win the race in November. And I think in this case, you know, Crowley, I mean, he didn't do great in Milwaukee, right? I mean, like, it's not like there's a groundswell for him. It's the most Democratic voters at this moment don't feel that you can be taking flyers, I think.
But that being said, this race is really close. It's 3,000 votes.
And
she could still win.
Say this, though.
And you look at the number. Go ahead.
Crowley is a little bit of a flyer in a different way, right? I mean, nobody has really. He is not really. He was in and out of this election. He has not been under
that's
the
for people that aren't following.
So
he dropped out of the race because he thought he couldn't win. Other people dropped out, and then he said, look, there's an opening there.
Does that inspire confidence in his leadership capacity for swing voters?
Of the choices on the menu.
But he's not Donald Trump.
Well, of the choices on the menu, he's the most conventional choice that was left for people.
But my point is low bar in this race.
But sometimes, to your point, in 2020, when the Democrats were looking, Joe Biden was somebody who felt like was, you know, safe. And people thought Trump was such an existential threat, they wanted safe instead of the risk.
The big broad parallel, and I suspect someone to my left is going to disagree with this, is that in 2019, there was a broad sense on the left in the Democratic Party that the repudiation, the souring on Trump by the electorate meant they wanted big, bold left change. And you saw that really powerful through the 2019 stage of the Democratic presidential primary when Bernie introduced Medicare for all. 5 candidates ultimately endorsed it. But then ultimately, when you got to the voters, after his early wins, right, in Iowa, Nevada, and New Hampshire, Buttigieg won, but after his early success there, black voters in South Carolina said, wait a minute, do we really want to put this up against Donald Trump, given all that is on the line? And again, you see this going back and forth in Democratic primaries this year. It's not like the senator's winning all of them, but that impulse, I think, is still there in some of these races. And if Crowley wins tonight, that will certainly be the reason why.
One of the candidates in that race is your mentor, Elizabeth Warren, who, of course, did not win that presidential race, did not endorse in this race, as she has in others. Why do you think she stayed out of this? Why do you think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, somebody you know well, stayed out of this?
I can't speak to exactly what conversations were had. I just don't think there was the relationship building there. I think this race was weird. There were candidates that came and went. I just don't think there was the relationship building. I think if she does pull this out, if Francesca Hung pulls this out, I think we'll see the entire Democratic establishment, obviously given the incredible importance of Wisconsin, come around her. But I think she just isn't somebody. I mean, she's pretty green to be in a race this important and this big, and I think that showed in her election night speech tonight.
So is Crowley. I mean, a Milwaukee County executive. I mean, he's an equivalent of a supervisor.
But I have to say, like, knowing Tom Tiffany, I'd still rather be us than be you. Like, I'd rather be a Democrat than a Republican. I think the Democrats are going to win in Wisconsin. The other thing
Francesca Hahn?
I think either one of them will win in Wisconsin.
All right.
I think they can both beat Tom Tiffany.
We have more to discuss on this. We will continue with you guys throughout the hour. We also want what's happening in Wisconsin. with us on set to give us some insight on what we're actually looking at in terms of the numbers in the hours ahead. He knows all of that. Stay with us. You're watching a special edition of The Story Is here on CNN. A live picture right now from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we are awaiting a speech, hopefully, from David Crowley, who is monitoring election results, as are we. Let's look at the numbers, and they actually just got a little better for Francesca Hong. During our commercial break, she made up about 400 votes. And so Crowley now ahead 2,791. It's now 39.6 to 39.6. Hong spoke just a short time ago saying she feels confident as votes are still being counted, although her speech, frankly, didn't sound that confident. Joining me now here live in Los Angeles is Stephen Olacara, a former U.S. Senate candidate in Wisconsin, a senior fellow right now for political reform at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute and founding CEO of Bridge Entertainment Labs. All right, you're the Wisconsin guy here. You know this so well. What should we be looking for? Where are we at right now when you see these numbers?
Right now, the next big shoe to fall is the roughly 28,000 absentee ballots that are going to be dropped in Milwaukee. It was supposed to happen about an hour ago. These USB drives, apparently they were missing some of the results.
Yeah, tell us this story. What is this? This about a USB drive?
So there, I believe, about 5 USB drives with the results that were going to the courthouse to be officially counted. They were missing the results, so they're going back to get those. And this late drop is actually pretty typical for Wisconsin.
Okay, for those that are suspicious about election integrity,
Yes.
That's not a great story.
Yes, yes. No, I mean, actually, there's quite a bit of bipartisan support for early counting of absentee votes, something that Ben Wickler, the former chair of the party, was talking about tonight.
So we're waiting for USBs or them to find the votes, I guess, as we now are waiting for what's happening in Wisconsin. I mean, coming into this, the thought was, in the last few days at least, that Francesca Hong had this thing and was going to win big. Why is she not?
So first, welcome to Wisconsin politics. This is what we do. And the Marquette Law School poll, which is the most respected poll in the state, showed Francesca up by somewhere around 20 points or so.
20 points.
Yeah. Depending on, there was a poll with Mandela Barnes still, and then there was a follow-up poll after that. So that showed her comfortably ahead, which in itself would have been an upset. Then David Crowley jumps back in with the support of the governor, Tony Evers, and ran a really strong 3-week campaign. They were barnstorming across the state. And what happened simultaneously is Francesca Hong was introduced to the nation and I think revealed some of the fears that Democratic primary voters had about Francesca and her ability to win a general election. And the other thing that happened is, get this, Alex, the #1 spender in the race for governor on the Democratic side were Republicans.
Yes, because they want Francesca Hong because they think she'd be such a weak general election campaign that they're trying to lift her up.
About $4.3 million spent by Republicans elevating Francesca Hong, and a lot of Democratic voters saw that and they saw, okay, let's look at this situation. If the Republicans clearly want to run against Francesca Hong, maybe we should be looking the other direction. So now we await David Crowley, I believe, to speak tonight. He's an electric speaker, so I'm excited to hear his remarks.
And at the beginning of this governor's race, or even in the middle of this governor's race, nobody thought either one of these people would be the one, right? I mean, there's been all over the map in terms of this race.
It's all over the map. Look, this is completely unprecedented in many ways. It's historic in many ways. The original name that people had heard of was our former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. And then going into the summer, the current Lieutenant Governor, Sarah Rodriguez, was gaining a lot of steam. She was winning a lot of straw polls in county parties, as well as the statewide Democratic Party. She won the straw poll. And so she had the momentum. She unexpectedly had a campaign finance issue, dropped out of the race. David Crowley jumps back in, so then it blew wide open after that.
Okay, so next up, how do you see the general election either way and sort of the most important things going forward?
Well, I think if Fran was going to, first let me say I'm friends with both of them and I'm proud of both of them, and they've both run great campaigns. I think if Fran happens to win this race, I think you give the early edge to Tom Tiffany because of how far left ideologically Fran has been presented, and how far out she is on some cultural issues. This whole Thanksgiving question that's come up, and her first impression on that was not her best effort. I think even she would admit to that.
Being anti-Thanksgiving?
Yeah, but the turkeys all support Fran.
Yeah.
I can be confident of that.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if David Crowley wins this primary, he will be the front runner going into the general election. I think that's why the governor of Wisconsin, he was not expected to jump into this race and endorse in this way. He's not known to be an extremely bold, politically kind of leader. So he was very clear in saying he believed, knowing all the candidates, knowing what the coalition it takes to win statewide and govern, deliver results, he believed that's David Crowley. And I do think he has the advantage if he wins the primary.
Well, it's interesting, and our panel was just pointing this off camera. He has not really been vetted that much publicly because so much has been focused on Francesca Hong. So you wonder how much opposition research could be going into them, and are there things that we don't know about him, that tend to come out when you got all that attention on you?
Yeah, it's an interesting story with David Crowley. First of all, he's been in public life for a bit. He was in the state assembly for several years. He ran for the county executive job in Milwaukee, which is a significant position. I actually disagree with your previous panelist. Milwaukee County Executive was the seat that Scott Walker had before he was elected to governor, and later ran for president. So this is actually David Crowley was the one candidate with significant governing experience as an executive from Milwaukee County. So I think he has been vetted quite a bit. Now, if you were to go into the general, certainly people would look into things, but I think David has been more vetted than Fran in terms of Wisconsin politics.
Great insights, Stephen Olikara. Thanks so much for being here. Does this make you miss being on the ballot?
No, I like being here. This is fun just to break down the news. It's less nerve-wracking.
All right. Well, it is great having you here to do it. It is election night in America. We continue to follow results, including in Wisconsin. Democratic primary for governor still too close to call. While Stephen was speaking, a bit of a lead for David Crowley. He went up 0.3% while that interview was happening. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Story Is. I'm Alex Michelson. We continue to follow the big top stories. The president says Iran would, quote, get blown away if it tries to do something in the Strait of Hormuz. This comes as Donald Trump insists that the U.S. still has total control over the critical waterway. Meanwhile, Trump administration officials are warning of higher oil and gas prices for next year. President Trump says he followed instructions from the Secret Service and military when he secretly switched aircraft in Turkey last month. A U.S. official tells CNN the covert switch was prompted by an Iranian assassination threat. After boarding Air Force One in front of the cameras, President Trump secretly exited the aircraft via a catering truck and was rushed into a smaller military plane without anybody noticing. President Trump flying to Ohio earlier to watch the end of the so-called Patriot Games, the Trump-backed event featuring high schoolers from every U.S. state, territory, and some tribal nations competing in various athletic challenges for $125,000 in scholarship money. Some politicians and observers say it wasn't a fair contest, alleging competitors were chosen for their alignment with Trump's politics rather than merit. Now back to the other big story we're following right now, the Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor. Still too close to call. We keep getting new numbers. You're looking at them there. Now 2,778 votes separate David Crowley and Francesca Hong. We've seen some changes, but we haven't seen the amount of changes that we would expect. And there's a crazy convert story for why. We just hit on this a little bit with Stephen Olikara as we bring in our panel, Ron Brownstein, Katie Porter, Matt Klink. Listen to this. This is from the Associated Press, reporting that at least 28,000 absentee ballots in Milwaukee could be delayed at least an hour. According to the AP, Milwaukee Election Commissioner Director Paulina Gutierrez said that audit logs instead of ballot results were uploaded onto flash drives. According to reports from the AP, those ballots could be the difference in the razor-thin Democratic primary for Wisconsin governor. So at a time when people are so focused on our votes and how they're cast and how they're counted and all the rest of this, this is not a great story.
No, look, I mean, you know, when elections get this close, you know, I mean, I remember I was in 2000, I was in Tallahassee during the recount forever. It gets very cold in Tallahassee in the winter. And someone said, I forget who, someone said to me, we have finally, it was one of the county election commissioners says, we have finally come to an election where the margin of victory is smaller than the margin of error. And, you know, I'm not sure we're there in Wisconsin, but, you know, when every vote counts, sometimes the system buckles a little under the pressure.
Yeah, as we think about hanging chads.
Yes,
for people
exactly.
old enough to remember what that means back in 2000, not so much an issue anymore. As we now do electronic vote counting, and you've got USB problems, Matt.
Look, there's still the human error factor. Someone hit the wrong button and hit save on the wrong file. I mean, it happens all the time. Unfortunately, it's just now with the world watching. Yeah. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any ill intent here. There's no skullduggery or things going on. Someone just screwed up, and I'm sure that they'll figure it out and get the right drive to the right place. But and it frustrates people like us.
And meanwhile, we wait for David Crowley, who we hear is waiting to hear those results before he comes out to speak, yet his party continues. Francesca Hong's party already over.
Well, I mean, I think David Crowley he's the leader, so he's going to keep waiting. He might get to give a victory night speech on, I guess now it's day 2, because we're into the wee hours of the morning in Wisconsin. But I think he's smart to wait. I think that last batch of Milwaukee ballots will be important. It's, you know, we're getting closer and we're having kind of the same problem we saw Haley Stevens have with Abdul El-Sayed. There's just aren't that many uncounted ballots left. She would have to win them by a very big margin to make up that gap.
Yeah, although we know of at least 28,000 that are outstanding in that particular dump, and right now the margin 2,778.
And since it's absentee ballots, it could have been cast while he was out of the race.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
And it could be for other candidates that are no longer in the race
of course,
well.
He could be heading to a George McGovern time for his acceptance speech, which was famously 2 a.m. in 1972.
I mean, he's right up against that now, I would say.
I think there should be a bingo card for historical references for people that are watching you, or a drinking game or something.
Yeah, something like that.
How many different eras you can bring into one segment.
The 2 a.m. acceptance speech. If I was him, I might wait till the morning show in Milwaukee, but that would be me.
Okay. Well, speaking of old versus young and different demographics, an interesting race in Connecticut tonight. Let's bring this up onto the screen. Yet another incumbent Democratic congressional candidate is out, or will be out in January. Luke Brannan defeats John Larson. John Larson, 78 years old. Luke Brannan in his 40s. Congressmember Porter, this is somebody you served with for a long time. There's clearly a wave happening right now with young Democrats who are fed up with old Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, look, John Larson was a terrific member, worked tirelessly on Social Security, but I think what Luke Brannan said back was, yeah, you've been working tirelessly, and guess what? Social Security still isn't fixed. You've had a decade plus to try to get this issue fixed, and you haven't gotten it done.
And you've been eligible for it for 13 years.
That's right. So take a gamble on me. Like, give me a stab at it. And I think there was some of that feeling. I think when we got in 18, all the new elected Democrats, we were eager to do things. And one of the things I kept hearing is, well, I have a bill on that, and I've been working on it since the mid-90s. And part of my reaction was, maybe you're not going to get it over the finish line if you've been waiting for 25 years to do it. And so I think this one's an interesting one because it wasn't a progressive moderate fight. Right. It really was like, you've been at this for a long time, and it just isn't, you're just not doing it anymore. And I think if I'm Ed Markey in Massachusetts, and I'm facing Seth Moulton, this result makes me a little nervous.
Very nervous.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Makes me a little nervous.
Moulton chose not to. Seth Moulton's running against Ed Markey in the Massachusetts, which will be one of the last
and
primaries.
Markey is the current senator. Moulton
70
has been in the House, run for president.
I think
serious
Markey was
candidate.
elected around the same time he was born in '76. The Moulton chose not. Moulton has been kind of a centrist gadfly in the Democratic Party, but he chose not to run. He's really de-emphasized all of that. He's made it fundamentally about generational change. And as we said before, that is a powerful impulse. We're seeing tonight Peggy Flanagan, 46, Al Sayed, 41, Crowley, 40, Hong, 37. Also, depending on how you count one complicated example in Texas, this is either the most incumbents who have lost in a non-reapportionment year since 1970 or now since 1962. So there is a level of discontent that goes beyond even what's happening in the Democratic Party.
We just got Nixon and Kennedy thrown in.
Yeah, I didn't.
Taking it back to before I was born, Ron.
Exactly.
I mean, it's interesting that a lot of these things, as we watch here in California, did not happen here. We had Jake Levine running against Brad Sherman. There are other examples of that in California. California seems to be a bit of an outlier to almost all of the national trends that we've seen in the Democratic Party this year.
I think that's right. I mean, we saw this with some of the frustration toward Joe Biden post that debate. People, why wasn't he's didn't do a good job, and yet we saw at that very same moment people saying, like, we can't ever criticize, Senator Feinstein. She's fine. We should honor her. We should let her keep serving. So I do think California is a little different on this, and I can't explain it to you, but I think we've seen it in enough instances that it's there.
Doris Matsui, right? Doesn't she? She still has the younger progressive challenger,
right.
Yes.
top two finish.
Yes.
Right. But look, I mean, I think one of the stories of this year is there is no silver bullet. There is no dynamic that is winning everywhere.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's no single theme to the Democrat. The theme is that the party is really searching for its direction. You have a lot of different forces that are closely contending, but I think this generational. We're ending with a very powerful generational story that I think is going to carry forward into 2028.
I think there is, though, a theme that there is a lot of frustration with incumbents and the establishment on both sides.
Totally.
And that's why you see so many incumbents going down. People are frustrated.
Trump beat two senators, too.
Both bases are frustrated that their party isn't doing enough to deliver. You guys are doing a great job, and I have high marks for you. You're going to stay as we continue to count the votes in Minnesota. We're also in Minnesota and in Wisconsin. Really interesting election in Minneapolis that we want to break down. You see there Amy Klobuchar speaking a little earlier. We'll hear from her. We'll go to a reporter on the ground to break down what's going to be one of the most interesting Senate races in the country. Stay with us.
I've been attacked for 5 years because I want to secure our election. Amy Klobuchar and I were in lockstep in 2020. She wanted the machines gone and go to paper ballots. Amy and I, she was the loudest voice, louder than me. But as soon as she was in the movie Kill Chain, the documentary. Amy wanted the machines gone. She named them. So did all the Democrats. Now, when I get there after 2020, what did I do? I spent $80 million all over this country trying to secure our election. What did Amy do? She turned her back on that fraud, went out to Washington, brought back, $9 billion, and had it shipped off to Somalia. Amy, I'm sorry, you should follow the money. You're not a good steward of money.
That was Trump-backed businessman and conspiracy theorist Mike Lindell, founder of MyPillow, who failed to get the Republican nomination in the Minnesota's governor race. CNN projects State House Speaker Lisa DeMuth will win the Republican nomination. She will now face off against U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who we just talked about there. Ran essentially unopposed for the Democratic nomination in terms of the big heavyweights of Minnesota. She kind of cleared the field of them. Meanwhile, CNN also projects Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan will be the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. This race was closer. The progressive defeating centrist U.S. House Democrat Angie Craig. Let's go live now to Minneapolis and Minnesota Star Tribune reporter Allison Kite joining us live. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's hear from Amy Klobuchar, the Democratic nominee for governor.
While the Republicans are still deciding their nominee, it has appeared for a while that this race has come down to two candidates. Mike Lindell, as you know, is Donald Trump's guy, and Lisa DeMuth. You may have seen her advertisements recently, lots of them. Well, most of those ads are paid for by one person, one man, one billionaire who doesn't even live in Minnesota, a Wisconsin billionaire who is one of Donald Trump's biggest donors.
Lisa Demuth, talk to us about the fact that the pillow guy who got the Trump endorsement, why didn't he win? And how do you see the dynamics of this governor's race going forward?
Certainly. So House Speaker Lisa Demuth was widely seen as the most electable on the GOP side of the equation for Minnesota governor. She had better funding than her rivals, Mike Lindell, who you mentioned, who was endorsed by President Donald Trump, and Kendall Qualls, who had the endorsement of the Minnesota GOP. And so she's going to go up against Amy Klobuchar and be probably the best situated to make that a tough race.
You say a tough race because we know President Trump is unpopular in Minnesota, but so is Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic incumbent. Could he be a drag on Amy Klobuchar?
You know, I think Senator Klobuchar is well positioned to kind of separate herself from the Walz administration's biggest political liability, which is fraud in social services programs in Minnesota. You know, she can credibly say that she was in Washington working on other issues and does not bear responsibility for those issues that have been a drag on the Walz administration. You know, but I think that there could be folks who are ready to hand over leadership from Democrats to Republicans in Minnesota. But I think Senator Klobuchar is going to be a formidable candidate.
Let's talk about the race for Minnesota Senate and show both candidates that we're talking about here, the Democratic and Republican side. On the Democratic side, as we mentioned, the Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, is going to be moving on after defeating Angie Craig, the Congress member, even though Angie Craig had backings from folks like Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries. Flanagan had the backing of Bernie Sanders and AOC and Tina Smith, who is retiring from the Senate. On the Republican side, Michelle Tafoya, who a lot of folks remember as a sports broadcaster, sideline reporter on NBC Sports for years, doing Sunday Night Football, she's now moving on. How do you see the dynamics of this particular race?
Certainly. So having Michelle Tafoya as the GOP nominee makes this potentially a really competitive race. I think it'll draw a lot more national attention, national money than, you know, a Peggy Flanagan versus Royce White race, for example. So it could shape up to be a pretty tight race. Peggy Flanagan, you know, has, as you mentioned, the progressive momentum behind her campaign compared to Angie Craig, who had a lot more money to spend and outside money benefiting her. So I think that Flanagan has really tapped into a progressive grassroots momentum. But a point that Angie Craig made on the campaign trail a lot is that she felt like she would be better situated to take on Republicans, have more statewide appeal. And so it could be a tight race between Tafoya and Flanagan.
And if Amy Klobuchar wins as governor, then there's an opening for her Senate seat, right? And she gets to pick that person.
That's correct.
And is there thought that could be Angie Craig?
You know, I think that will be held pretty close to the vest until we get much closer to that point.
All right. Minnesota Star Tribune reporter Allison Kite up late for us on a big night in Minneapolis politics. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Another big race we're following on this election night in America and Minnesota is in South Carolina. Just weeks after taking over her brother's U.S. Senate seat, Darlene Graham has qualified for a runoff for a full term. But this race could be close. We'll talk about the interesting dynamics underway here from our panel next.
This is a very emotional night, because I'm usually standing here celebrating with Lindsey. So I know he's looking down right now, smiling.
South Carolina Senator Darlene Graham speaking about an emotional night after she qualified for the August 25th runoff to compete for a full term. CNN projects that Representative Ralph Norman will be the second contender in that Republican runoff. It's very interesting. Matt Klink, you've got a competition here between Norman, who has 5 terms in Congress, and Darlene Graham, who has 28 days of service in the United States Senate. Real quickly, wrap around your thoughts on the South Carolina race.
Ralph Norman is a known commodity in South Carolina. He has a 98 score for Heritage Action. He's very conservative Freedom Caucus member. And that being said, Darlene Graham, because of her last name, will likely win the Republican primary.
Is this nepotism?
I mean, obviously. I mean, yes. We have a long tradition of that in the United States. I mean, a long, long tradition, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping. I just think the speed of the runoff here plays in Darlene Graham's favor. I mean, it's a 2-week runoff, I think, and so in 2 weeks, Norman doesn't have enough time to figure out, much less action, what he would have to do to pull ahead.
On the other hand, 33% with the last name Graham and the Trump endorsement is not a ringing endorsement by the voters. So I would say there's still at least some opening for Norman.
That some people might say you haven't done enough to actually prove yourself.
I mean, you know,
she keeps saying, I want to earn your vote.
Right.
I want you to trust me. I want to
But really her claim to the seat is that she's Lindsey Graham's sister. Right? And Donald Trump wants her because Ralph Norman endorsed Nikki Haley. Right? And that's what we're watching in South Carolina. And Trump has won these primaries when he's intervened, mostly across the country, but not entirely, as we saw tonight. And as I said, that's not a huge number with that last name and the Trump stamp, on your shoulder.
And for the governor's South Carolina race, he didn't win that, right? He initially endorsed somebody, then when it looked like she was going to lose, he endorsed 2 people,
right?
Well,
which is a great strategy to win.
If you're right, Ron, about this sort of incumbency bias, if it holds for Republicans, not just for Democrats, then I think that hurts Ralph Norman. I mean, he has been in Congress for a very long time. He is the epitome of a Southern, very conservative member. And so we're interesting to see if that's a Democratic phenomenon. We certainly are seeing
sympathy factor gets it for.
If you look at the results tonight, I was just taking a quick look. I mean, it looked like she was doing better in the population centers, right? Kind of that more country club Republican. I'm not sure that's the winning hand in South Carolina. In a South Carolina Republican primary, it may be the one who is stronger in the rural areas. She did do well in Greenville, and it's a big evangelical vote, but we'll see.
So this is the time when I usually say good night on The Story Is, but not tonight. We're sticking around, all 3 of you sticking around for another hour because we still don't know what's going to happen in Wisconsin. We're waiting for USB drives. Hopefully they get delivered in the next hour, and we may even have a call. This important race. Stick with us for an extra hour of The Story Is right after this break. It's election night in America, which means you get a special 3rd hour of The Story Is. I'm Alex Michelson, live for you in Los Angeles. Election night not over yet because we're following a very close race in Wisconsin, super important, where we're percentage points or less than a percentage point away to figure out who is going to be governor. Democratic Socialist Francesca Wong or Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. We're looking at the margin here. Right now, Crowley ahead by 2,782 votes, 39.9% to 39.6%. Election officials there say results will be delayed after incorrect files were submitted instead of ballot results. Those 28,000 missing ballots could decide who will take on Republican Tom Tiffany in November. Hong spoke to her supporters earlier about what she believes sets her apart from the projected Republican nominee.
When our neighborhoods and our neighbors are disappeared by uncontrolled ICE fascists, it's Tom Tiffany who shows up in support. And while he's doing that, we are fighting for hope. We are fighting for the freedom to show compassion to one another and to show care for the people around us.
So we were waiting for Crowley to make a speech, But apparently, it looks like they're done for the night. This guy, very well dressed with the tuxedo look going on. It looks like the crews are cleaning up. I don't know if they're watching us or another network, but thank you. So it doesn't look like we're going to be getting that speech from him anytime soon. Let's take you to Minnesota. CNN projects that Senator Amy Klobuchar will win the Democratic primary for governor there. She's seeking to take over the office from outgoing Governor Tim Walz, who abandoned a bid for the third term because it didn't look like he could win a bid for a third term. We're going to get our panel in a second, but we start things off for the hour here in L.A. with Stephen Olikara, a former U.S. Senate candidate in Wisconsin, senior fellow for political reform at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute and founding CEO of Bridge Entertainment Labs. Stephen, welcome back. You know this state better than anybody. You've run in this state. You're talking to people on the ground in this state. Where are we at right now in the Senate race or the governor's race, and what's going on?
Well, Alex, I'll tell you, the group chats of Wisconsin Democrats have been blowing up all night. And I remember a particular moment about 3-4 hours ago where a friend of mine and we were looking at the returns in Madison, which is Francesca Hung's core area of support, and she was underperforming there. So that was the first sign that this night was going to be longer than you would expect. And the other thing is when you talk to undecided voters, of which there were many, that was consistent in the polling, many of them have been breaking for Crowley. By the folks I was talking to, probably about 9 out of 10 were breaking for Crowley. So there are a few things for people to recognize at home. One is that David Crowley is a serious force, and I think his name wasn't known as much nationally, but Milwaukee County Executive is a very serious position. And if you look at some of the reporting from the Journal-Sentinel, the state's paper that reporters like Zachary Suri had been reporting on, David Crowley had achieved some major wins, particularly around reducing homelessness in the state. And I think that ties to something that Wisconsin's very proud of, which is a progressive tradition of achieving results. And so I think that, along with a number of other factors, obviously Tony Evers, the governor, endorsing him, and David Crowley having a strong message, has led to the undecideds breaking for him. And simultaneously, Francesca Hung, who you have to give her credit. This is still an amazing showing that she's having tonight. Obviously, politics is an expectations game. But Francesca Hung really built a following around not only progressive issues, but specifically taking on these AI data centers, and that really helped to propel her campaign. But some of the late-breaking voters, I think, were concerned about her ability to perform in the general election and her a preview of the general election that happened over the last 2 weeks, as she did a lot of national interviews and some of her past problem tweets during so-called Woke One came back to haunt her. So things can still go either way, but I think Crowley, as we look at these remaining ballots from Milwaukee, probably has an edge.
And some of those, of course, were things like, defund the police, tax the rich, but then also not very pro-Thanksgiving or Valentine's Day or July 4th. So we see the David Crowley headquarters. They're taking the sign down there, so it doesn't look like he's going to give a victory speech tonight. If he does in the morning, and would you say that right now it looks like the most likely outcome on this is that he wins this thing? What's the message for him potentially going into the general election, and how close a race could this be in November?
Wisconsin is always a close state, so you'd have to expect that this is going to be a nail-biter, even if David Crowley becomes the nominee. His core message is going to be pragmatic progressivism. You know, he's been driving this message in the last few days that being a progressive is not just about rhetoric, it's about delivering results. And David Crowley came into this race being the person who had real governing as well as the legislative experience. It was actually more of a surprise that in the spring and early summer, his campaign really wasn't catching steam. But now, if he does move on to the general election, he'll say, I'm a progressive who's going to challenge the status quo, but I also have governing experience, and I can build a statewide coalition. When David Crowley ran for county executive in Milwaukee, he ran on a message of building bridges. And Alex, you know me. I love that kind of message. And by the way, you need that kind of message to win statewide in Wisconsin. So I think that's what he'll drive home if he wins tonight or tomorrow.
Great brand discipline for the guy from Bridge Entertainment, bringing the Bridges line into it. Stephen Olacara, well done there. By the way, we just heard from our colleague Jeff Zeleny, who said that David Crowley is waiting for that last batch of absentee votes that are on these USB drives that apparently didn't get transported correctly, and he's likely not going to speak tonight. Likely going to speak tomorrow morning, which is not surprising based off of the pictures that we just saw there, but wanted to see those final numbers, potentially turn this into a victory speech, something he could make for the morning shows in Wisconsin. Let's bring back in our panel. Ron Brownstein, CNN political analyst and columnist with Bloomberg, Democrat Katie Porter, member of the House and ran for governor and senator here in California, and Matt Klink, a Republican strategist as well as the owner and president of Klink Campaigns. Ron, part of the reason that this race has gotten so much national attention is because not of the word Democrat, but the Democratic Socialists of America, something that Francesca Hong is proudly a part of, something no other Democratic nominee for governor has ever been a part of. And if she loses, is that a big loss for that movement?
Well, you know, as we've talked about, the gains for the left to this point, to last week, had primarily, not exclusively, primarily come in safe blue areas. The three Mamdani candidates in New York, Harris won over 7% in all those districts. Denver district won by Democratic Socialist. Harris won over 70% in that district. Then Abdul El-Sayed won in a true swing state, Michigan, one of the states at the core.
Who's not a Democratic Socialist.
But has similar positions.
Then adjacent.
Adjacent.
but that is important.
And then
that
here,
he just says, I'm a capitalist.
Totally. And then this time, you have the actual, you know, someone who identifies as a Democratic Socialist, potentially the Democratic nominee, in a state where, as your last guest noted, a great night for the Democrats is when they win by 25,000 votes, right? It is a very competitive state at the heart of presidential politics, and again, where you have not only kind of the symbolic implications of whether someone like that can win, the practical implications. If Democrats lose this seat to Tom Diffeny, there's going to be complications in 2028 in certifying, in all likelihood, given the way that he responded to the 2020 election. So the reason why this election, I think, has gotten so much attention, just as Michigan, was because it showed this this progressive wave to the point of socialism extending outside, breaking beyond the boundaries where it had been contained and moving into places where Democrats have to win in November.
And Congressmember, a lot of people think of California as so far left or so far blue. But before we gerrymandered our elections, we had close congressional races where you actually had to run against a tough Republican and win, which is something that you did in Orange County and helped to flip a district there. You know what it's like to be in a close race against a Republican, and that's what we're looking at here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I think, look, the point that Stephen Olacara made about Crowley's administrative experience, I give him that. I think that's right. He knows he's had experience governing. That's great. He's running for governor. What he hasn't had experience with is the entire multi-bajillion-dollar Republican right-wing machine sort of coming at you, and that is a force to feel.
You know what that feels like.
And I know what that feels like, and he doesn't. Now, to be fair, neither does Francesca Hong.
She's got a taste of that.
She had a little taste of it.
She's gotten a few appearances on Fox News in the last week, just a few.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think both of them, in some ways, to me, what's sort of, as a Democrat, most disappointing about this election is this is what we've got. Two relatively untested, relatively, unvetted.
You think it feels like a
candidates.
JV squad?
Well,
I don't want to say that because, look, Francesca is a trailblazer. She's the first Asian American woman elected in Wisconsin. She's built this campaign out of nothing. So kudos to her for doing it. And you heard great things about Crowley. He's brought homelessness down. That's something California hasn't been
able to do that here.
Hasn't been able to figure out how to do that here in California.
We could elect somebody who did that.
If you're me and you're saying, what does this race contribute to where Democrats go nationally? I think the answer is not much.
Well,
Because neither of these people, I think, is likely, especially Crowley, is not going to be a major player in shaping the voice of the Democratic Party going forward.
They were each kind of the stand-ins, right? I mean, Sarah Rodriguez was supposed to be the candidate of the center, and Mandela Barnes was supposed to be the candidate of the left, and neither of them really got traction. I would say if Francesca Hong is the nominee and she loses, that would have an impact on Democrats
But I'm
going
not
forward.
28 in a
Yes.
very big way.
I
Absolutely.
still think
What
Tom
would that
Tiffany
message be?
No, look, I think it's the same thing with El Sayed. I mean, you know, the left is going to come out of the 28 primary season with a certain amount of momentum, but the story could change depending upon the results in the general election. You saw again here, there are a lot of Democratic voters who are worried about electability. Hard to get back to the White House without winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin for Democrats. If El Sayed doesn't win in November, and if Hong is the nominee and she doesn't win in November, I think that really changes the interpretation of this going into 28 for whoever will be the champion of the left, whether it's AOC or someone
Because
else.
progressives, Matt, have so often felt like they've been boxed out of the general
Yes.
election,
Well,
sometimes by rigged elections, they would
have.
claim by the Democratic
2016
National
and
Committee.
2020,
And so
absolutely.
they haven't got that shot because
Right.
and so now you're getting your shot in Michigan, and you may be getting your shot in Wisconsin. Here it is, put up or shut up.
They've said, give us the chance, give me the ball, coach. I'm ready to carry.
I
I'm
can
ready
only
to
prove
take it."
electability if I'm on the ballot.
allowed to be on the ballot. And now they have their opportunity in Michigan. I think it's going to be probably a closer race than it would have been if the other candidate had won. And look, I think that if Hong wins, that's, I mean, $3.6 million from the Republican Governors Association spent to put her in that seat. They want to run against her. She's a much easier target. Crowley may be a progressive, but he will run as a more conventional Democrat, and that will create some problems, but it'll still be a really close race.
And Crowley would likely make almost no national headlines, right? And this becomes more of a local race, whereas Francesca Hong becomes more of a national
it would
story and
blow
a
up.
big test
It would
of
blow
the
up.
Democratic
Yeah,
Socialists of America.
Yeah.
But let me say, Francesca's policies, similar to Abdul, that Abdul El-Sayed ran on, are very popular things. Medicare for all may not be what the typical establishment Democrat is doing in Washington, but believe you me, when you poll Democratic voters, they like it. Getting money out of politics.
Until you put a cost onto Medicare
Right.
for all.
But things like the data center, taking a position on that, that is a looming issue where establishment Washington doesn't have much to say, but the population does.
Well,
right?
Republicans and
Small point of fact, though, unlike, I think, your position and Tom Steyer, she does not support trying to do that at the state level. She supports it as a national policy, but basically says it's not feasible for a state to do it, and she just wants to expand Badger Care, their Medicaid expansion. But the basic point is right. I mean, you know, part of what we've seen in these primaries, I think, is really important. The center has not really been willing to challenge some of the left ideas. I mean, you have not, you know, Becerra did not, presumably by the end of that campaign, support Medicare for all, but he wouldn't say that on the stage. And the same thing, I mean, Haley Stevens did not challenge Medicare for all. She did not challenge abolishing as opposed to reforming ICE. The center is not really engaging with the left in these primaries. They're basically saying these positions make them unelectable, not trying to make a case against them to Democratic voters, which is what Biden and Buttigieg did in 2020.
Last word, Matt.
there's a reason why there is so much oxygen around these Democratic Socialists and super progressive candidates. They actually are saying, we hate Donald Trump, but these are our ideas. The mainstream of the Democratic Party, they have one thing: Orange Man bad. Nothing else.
Right.
And reverse a lot of the things he's done.
And that's the challenge right now. That's why.
So what is, I mean, let me over time, but what is the mainstream Democratic platform of what to do? What is the establishment Democratic plan if they take over?
I don't know why you're looking at me.
Come on, Katie.
I ran.
I know you ran on
famously
ideas.
as a more progressive
I
Democrat.
know, but
Look,
I still don't know what. I cover this for a living. I've moderated
said this.
debates, and I could not tell you what the actual Democratic plan is for governing the country.
Look, and I think that is our problem. And I think that is a problem that we are not going to solve unless we get some new people into Washington. They don't have to be new progressive people. That's why I think it's exciting that we're seeing some new, fresh blood, even out of the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. We have to be the party of good ideas. Orange Man bad It's true, but it's not a new idea.
No, exactly.
We've been doing that now for 10 full years. We had that same line.
You can get through a midterm election with that, really. I mean,
but
you can't get through a
fix the
presidential.
country.
Well, look, you're not going to fix the country very much while he's president in terms of passing democratic ideas.
And you're probably not passing Medicare for
Right,
all
exactly.
or abolishing ICE or any of that in its time around either. All right, Katie Porter, Matt Klink, Ron Brownstein. We'll have more of you guys coming up. Minnesota also counting primary votes. We'll have the latest results for key races, including governor and Senate. Our election night coverage continues, and right after this. To Minnesota now, some key primary election results. CNN projects State House Speaker Lisa Demuth has won the Republican nomination for governor. Demuth, the top elected Republican in Minnesota, defeated MyPillow founder and conspiracy theorist Mike Lindell, who was endorsed by Donald Trump. She now faces an uphill battle taking on U.S. Senate Democrat Amy Klobuchar, who ran virtually unopposed for the Democratic nomination. Let's bring in our next panel of experts. From Chicago, Mike Nellis, a Democratic strategist and host of Endless Urgency. And from Stanford, Lanhee Chen, former Mitt Romney policy director and fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Mike, let's start with you, and let's start with the Minnesota Senate race. We can bring those results up, which is interesting. It was a battle between left and more centrist candidate, and Peggy Flanagan, the lieutenant governor, endorsed by Bernie Sanders, endorsed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and endorsed by the retiring Senator Tina Smith, defeating Angie Craig, now is going to be the nominee against Michelle Tafoya, the longtime sports reporter from NBC Sports, Sunday Night Football, is going to be winning the Republican primary. How do you see that race?
Yeah, well, I think it's really exciting. It's a huge win for the left right now. Peggy Flanagan is the lieutenant governor. She's an amazing leader. I think she's going to be a great addition to the Democratic caucus. I think Republicans are going to have a hard time beating her. I think the Republicans are in a really tricky situation in Minnesota. They were celebrating when Governor Walz announced his retirement, and they're rewarded with Amy Klobuchar, who's very likely going to be the next governor. And she is a very savvy, brutal operator politically. You have to have a lot of respect for the grit that she brings to it. And then Donald Trump suffered a terrible loss in the primary because he endorsed the MyPillow guy, Mike Liddell, and he's finished in second place. Right now, Liddell's on the internet talking about how the election was rigged against him. So I feel like you have a massive mess for the Republicans. You have a good situation for the Democrats putting their best foot forward. And I think Peggy Flanagan and Amy Klobuchar are going to do great.
But, Mike, wouldn't you rather run against Mike the Pillow guy?
I would, but I'll take any opportunity to remind people that Donald Trump is a lame duck and his grip on the Republican Party is loosening.
Lanhee Chen, I know you're looking especially closely at what's happening right now in Wisconsin, which is the race that we still do not know who is going to win. David Crowley has a very small lead right now, about 3,885. So that's gone up a little bit since we looked at it the last time. So literally in the last few moments, that's gone up, which is good news for him because it was getting pretty close. She still has a chance to win if she wins big in the late numbers. We still got, thousands of votes still to be counted. How do you see this race?
Well, I think the question is always, to what degree are races like this nationalized? To what degree do they become part of the broader discussion around what's happening in our politics, control of the Congress, even though this is a governor's race? And I think in that way, it looks like both Democrats and Republicans have something positive to draw from tonight. I think in Wisconsin, if David Crowley is able to hold on, they're going to have dodged the bullet of Francesca Hong, who I think would have been a big lead weight on a lot of Democratic candidates around the country. Her ideas, as recently as a few years ago, as recently as a few weeks ago, would certainly, I think, have haunted a lot of Democratic candidates. In the same way, for Republicans in Minnesota, avoiding Mike Lindell is a good outcome for Republicans because you would not have to deal with the kinds of things that he would say. To the degree that that race would be nationalized, it would be a problem for Republicans, I think. So the nationalization of our politics means that you have these candidates in states like Minnesota and Wisconsin where they might be running state races, but fundamentally what they say and what they do becomes part of this national discussion. And I think increasingly that's been the case in our politics.
And Lonnie, both of those candidates to a degree, Francesca Hong and Mike the Pillow Guy, not to the same extent, have essentially been caricatures, right? Or turned into caricatures for the other side and used on competing cable news networks as an example of the extremes of what the other side is and to try to define the other side.
Yeah, I mean, they've become avatars. There's no question about it. And then other candidates have to answer for what these people say, even if they may never have met them, they may not agree with them, they may think their ideas are completely wacky, but they're going to have to answer for questions around whether you think Thanksgiving should be canceled or whether you think there was a conspiracy around this, that, or the other. So I do think that is the challenge, is that it's more than just what these people do in these individual races. It's what they do to their respective parties and their respective political movements nationally. And I certainly think that both of these candidates have exhibited exactly the reason why, frankly, the other side would have been delighted to run again. Republicans would have loved to run against Francesca Hong in the same way Democrats probably would want to run against Mike Lindell.
And Mike Nellis, as we look at the numbers from Wisconsin, we are getting word that those USB drives have been processed and those outstanding absentee ballots are coming in. And as we look at those numbers, that David Crowley's lead has gone up, which means I imagine that CNN and other networks are getting close to potentially calling this race for David Crowley. It's hard to see a path at this point for Francesca Hong to win this race.
Yeah, you would much rather be David Crowley in this moment. It just seems where the outstanding votes are going to be in his favor. And likely by the time we all wake up in the morning, although you guys might be on for a little bit while longer, I'm going to bed right after this. We're going to find out who the winner of this race has been. I sort of agree. I think this might be the best case scenario, though, for both the DSA wing of the party and the moderate wing of the party. I mean, I don't think it's fair to compare Francesca Hong to Mike Lindell. I think she ran a very serious campaign that was centering the issues that people are feeling and the troubles that they're experiencing in Wisconsin. However, I think it's a very risky thing to put a candidate up who is that far to the left, who sort of like fumbled on some big issues, including some small stuff like talking about whether or not Thanksgiving is a good holiday or a bad holiday, which was a pretty rough clip. You don't want to take that risk there, especially when she's running against Tom Tiffany, who is an election denier and is basically going to do whatever Donald Trump does. So I think this is the best case scenario. And I'll add one final thought here too, which is David Crowley is a huge progressive. Like, it's still a big win for the progressive wing of the party. I think we're elevating new generation of candidates, and maybe it's not exactly how you would have liked it to play out because the primary's been messy, but I think we're in a good spot and we'll be in a good position to win this race in the general.
You were likely to learn a lot more about David Crowley in the next 24 hours.
Yes.
Mike Nellis, Lanhee Chen, thank you for being with us, and he's likely to get a whole lot of money coming in from his Democratic friends as well. We continue to follow results in Wisconsin, which right now look pretty good for David Crowley. The race still too close to call, but it may not stay that way for long. Stay with us. It is still election night and election morning, depending on where you are. Back to one of our top stories, the Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor. Still too close to call for the moment. State Assembly member Francesca Hong, tight race with Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. Thin margin separates them. Crowley now ahead by almost 4,000 votes, 312,000 to 308,000. The winner will face Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, who has been endorsed by President Trump. We've been waiting, Ron, for this last big tranche, whatever you want to call it. It was sort of Francesca Hong's big last hope. Didn't look too good for her.
No, and look, I think interesting to compare Wisconsin and Minnesota tonight, because I think the story still is, with very few exceptions, El Sayed is the biggest one, where electability is still a concern. In a swing state, Democratic voters are still shying away from the most liberal options. Minnesota is an easier state for Democrats to win than Wisconsin, and Peggy Flanagan winning there, and Crowley apparently likely to win in Wisconsin, is revealing of what we've seen around the country. One other point, the total turnout in this may reach about 90% of the presidential year primary turnout in 2020 in Wisconsin. Democratic voters are very engaged, and that is a reality that amid all of the kind of struggle in the party is still out there facing Republicans in November.
I say two things that set El Sayed apart. One, he is not a democratic socialist. And two, he is an exceptional political athlete.
Yeah, he's good.
Who is one of the more charismatic people that's ever been on this set, whether you agree with him or don't.
Yeah.
And a lot of these other people don't fit that category.
Yeah.
There is some credit's due for being candidates. There are actually candidate quality matters.
It does, yeah.
Candidate quality matters. And I think sometimes Democrats get too caught up in these labels, progressive, moderate. At the end of the day, it's not the only thing that matters, but candidate quality goes a long ways. I would rather have a really talented, charismatic, strong voice with thoughtful policy, with leadership, who's a little more progressive. I would take that any day over kind of a moderate dud. I think that is a trade-off. Now, I will say, I think here in Wisconsin, what we've got is two candidates, both of whom are progressive. One of them is a Democratic socialist, but these are both progressive candidates, and they are running against an election-denying Trump sycophant in Tom Tiffany. I think this is not maybe the best example of the litmus test between progressive and moderate. I think the Michigan Senate race was a better example of that.
If Crowley holds on, which seems the most likely outcome at this point, if we're being honest with the audience, what's the big takeaway?
Well, look, the guy that we have largely, ignored tonight or called, negative terms. This race in Wisconsin is going to be nail close. I mean, it's going to be nip and tuck all the way through the
not only tonight.
Correct. Yeah. No, I mean, Wisconsin races are always close. I think that David Crowley is going to learn more about everything he has ever done in the next 2.5 months, and the voters of Wisconsin are going to learn that too. And again, Tom Tiffany has money right now. David Crowley will get the money. So,
and talk about the political strategy, because this is the kind of stuff you work on, right? If you're working for Tom Tiffany, what does the next 24 hours look like?
I would want, why did this guy get no traction? Why did he drop out? Look at David Crowley's record. I would start picking and probing what's his background. I mean, there's so much research that needs, I'm sure it's already largely been done, but every media interview this guy has ever done, they're going to pick through, and then they're going to start dissecting it. And again, he's got a lot of money. Wisconsin is not an expensive state to advertise in. So this is not going to be a shoe leather state. This is going to be, they're going to blow it out on connected TV and on TV buy.
We're going to go around the horn. Final thought from each of you.
A good night in Wisconsin is when one party wins by 25,000. So it's going to be close. I'm just struck again the generational urge in the Democratic Party that we're seeing tonight. Apart from these ideological fights, that is a consistent theme and one I think is going to be a big lesson for 2028.
Really motivated Democratic voters, really high turnout in these primaries. Then we saw that last week in Michigan. We're seeing that again. If that is really good news for Democrats, that helps Democrats not just win these races that we've been talking about, Alex, but it helps Democrats win local races. It helps us win school board races. It helps us win assembly races. All of that stuff matters when there's so much standing up to Donald Trump to be done at every level of government.
Close primary campaigns make for good general election candidates. The fight in the primary is a proving ground for the general election. So I love that we're still talking about this race right now.
And I love
It's
that we're still talking at 11:30 here on the West Coast and 2:30 on the East Coast. And last week when you were all with us and we did an extra hour, our ratings actually grew in the 2 a.m. hour, which never ever happens, but happened because all three of you are so fun to watch and listen to. Thank you for hanging out for the last 3 hours. Our coverage, though, is not done, and we're still awaiting a result here. So we're going to continue to talk about other elections happening as well. Just weeks after taking over her brother's U.S. Senate seat, Darlene Graham is qualified for a runoff for a full term. We'll hear from her next, plus more analysis as we continue to wait the final numbers from Wisconsin here on The Story Is. We are following election results in South Carolina, where 2 Republican Senate candidates are advancing to a runoff after a special primary following the death of longtime Senator Lindsey Graham. His sister, Darlene, who was appointed to fill his seat, has now qualified for the August 27th runoff. She'll face off against Representative Ralph Norman. Graham had this to say about two key issues.
I support the right to life. I believe that every human life is sacred and deserves protection. I strongly support the Second Amendment. I believe gun control is how steady you hold your weapon.
Live now to Washington, and Jacob Rubishkin, deputy editor at Inside Elections. Please say your last name so I get it correct.
It's Rubashkin.
Rubashkin, thank you very much for staying up late for us, and you deserve to have it pronounced correctly after doing that. Thanks for being with us. Darlene Graham,
No
that's an easy last name to say. As we bring up the vote totals, it says incumbent next to her name. She's been the incumbent for 28 days. She's running against Ralph Norman, who has been a 5-term congressman from South Carolina. How do you see that race from here? This very interesting dynamic of a new senator with a name that people are so familiar with.
This has been a real whirlwind. We are basically a month to the day since Lindsey Graham passed away and since Darlene, his younger sister, was appointed to this seat, and less than that since she became a real candidate for this. And in D.C. didn't run in this election. So things are very fluid. They're moving very quickly. This is a real race, though. I think Ralph Norman was the most difficult opponent for Darlene Graham that she could have drawn in this very condensed 2-week runoff. I think either of these two could end up winning the Republican nomination and likely being the next senator from South Carolina.
And it is crazy to think of just 2 weeks for all of this to happen. When you think about like a presidential election, which goes over 2.5 years, that this is such a condensed time schedule as well. It's been a big night on a lot of different fronts. Wisconsin, Minnesota, we've seen elections around the country. What's your big headline of the night? What's the story that stands out to you?
You know, there are a lot of marquee contests here. The biggest one in Wisconsin, obviously, we don't have a race call there yet, but David Crowley looks like he is in pole position to win that race narrowly. If you want to call it the revenge of the moderates, you know, I think that would be a somewhat fair assessment. But then you've got Peggy Flanagan winning that Democratic primary in a blowout in Minnesota. So the progressives have gotten their licks in too. Look, I think that what this is demonstrating is the breadth of the conflicting kinds of candidates and beliefs within the Democratic Party. You've got a wide variety of people, from Luke Bronin out in Connecticut's 1st congressional district, who just ousted a 14-term incumbent, John Larson, running essentially from the right in that Democratic primary, all the way to Francesca Hong, a Democratic socialist, nearly winning the gubernatorial nomination in one of the premier swing states in Wisconsin.
And a reminder that candidate quality matters, that and elections are local too. And there are local issues in all of these that are maybe not picked up on the national coverage that really can drive voters as well. And it's going to be fascinating to see where we go from here. It's clear, though, Jacob, voters are engaged, especially on the Democratic side.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we heard this a little earlier. I think Ron was talking about the degree of primary voter turnout. We saw this in Michigan last week. Voter turnout was through the roof. This has been a consistent theme in Democratic primaries, certainly over the last couple of months. Democratic voters are fired up, and they're looking for candidates who are reflecting that fire back at them. When you look at a candidate like Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota, who got up there in her victory speech tonight and said, we need to tear ICE apart, I think those were her words, and remove them from our communities, especially in Minnesota, but in Michigan, Dr. El Sayed there in that primary, voters are looking for candidates who are reflecting their anger and frustration back at them. Whether they're moderate or more progressive, I think is a secondary concern to whether voters think that they're up for the fight.
Jacob staying up late with us to share his insights and his artwork. Nicely done in the decorating behind you. Thanks so much for being with us. We continue to follow what's happening in Wisconsin. Up next, Stephen Olikara, who ran for Senate there, really knows what's happening on the ground, has been in touch with everybody there. Will be back with us. Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor, still too early to call. State Assembly member Francesca Hong. Tight race with Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. Crowley now up by almost 4,000 votes. Hong running out of votes with 98% of the estimated vote in there. It's so close, Stephen Olikara, former U.S. Senate candidate in Wisconsin. But it's looking really good for David Crowley right now.
Absolutely. At this moment right now, you want to be David Crowley. Yeah. The Milwaukee ballots have dropped. They have gone generally in David Crowley's favor. I expect that we'll see some news soon. Hopefully very soon. But the big story right now is Tony Evers, the governor of Wisconsin. This is someone who took a major political swing to resurrect David Crowley's campaign, put his entire force behind him. This was not just an endorsement. For the last week to 2 weeks or so, right when Tony Evers came back from an international trip, he went right on the road with David Crowley. And in the past few days, you heard the tone in Governor Evers' voice in saying, we're going to win this thing. And having known Governor Evers a little bit, I don't think he has a great poker face. No offense to him. He really believed they're going to win this thing. And clearly tonight's results show that.
Just got another brief update. Now Crowley up 3,211 votes ahead in this race, getting closer and closer. So what are the big issues that are going to be at the forefront, assuming this is now Crowley moving forward? What does the November election look like?
So now the race changes. Originally, people thought it was going to be socialism versus MAGA. But now you're going to have a race that's about progressive pragmatism versus MAGA. And that's a very different kind of race. So Tom Tiffany, the Republican nominee, he is someone who is completely wrapped in the MAGA brand. That is a brand that is underwater in Wisconsin by about 15 to 20 points. And so now the focus of the campaign is really going to be on the economy and affordability. What it was almost about to be focused on were these culture war issues and Thanksgiving and abolishing ICE and the police and prisons. That was not good ground for Democrats. But now if you start talking about pocketbook issues, if you start talking about how the Iran war has been driving up costs, and David Crowley can say, hey, I've been serving in the Milwaukee County executive role as a leader, delivering results, that is a completely different conversation. And I think that's going to drive the election going forward.
Wisconsin is one of those states that it's very hard to see the Democrats winning the presidency without winning Wisconsin. And when they've lost it is usually when they lose the presidency.
Wisconsin has been the decider for national elections for a number of years now, whether it's 2016, you go back. Wisconsin not just decides elections, but I think we help to decide our political culture as well. And I actually think this result tonight is obviously a game changer for Wisconsin. It's a game changer when you talk about the certification of the next presidential election in 2028. But it also reshapes who might emerge in the 2028 primary on the Democratic side. So this has massive, massive implications tonight, just an earthquake.
And it makes it harder for Republicans to create that caricature, because what Republicans do very, very well, and Democrats do it as well, but Republicans really do it on one of our competing networks, which is to take the most extreme person you've ever seen for one party and say that person is what every Democrat is. So every Democrat is against Thanksgiving because she doesn't like Thanksgiving. They can't do that anymore if she's now not in the race.
What's so unusual about this race that we've seen over the last few weeks is the general election had already started.
Right.
And Tom Tiffany and Francesca Hong started going at each other. The Republicans started unloading their opposition on Fran. That became a trial run for Wisconsin Democrats, and they said, we don't like what we're seeing here. And so you're absolutely right. This election that was about to be focused on these cultural war issues are now going to be much more about Donald Trump and his economic record.
It's going to be really fun to watch. Stephen, thank you for being with us the last few hours as our guide through all of this. One last story before we go. The Powerball jackpot is now the highest it's been since December. The grand prize has soared to an estimated $1 billion after nobody won in Monday night's drawing. The next one will happen on Wednesday. While the payout would be massive, it's still nowhere near the all-time Powerball record of $2 billion. Won by a single ticket right here in California almost 4 years ago. The celestial sky will be putting on quite a show over the next few days. First up, a total solar eclipse that's set to cross over Iceland, Greenland, Spain, and Russia. For about 2 minutes, the moon will line up perfectly with the sun, plunging several countries into darkness. And in a rare alignment, the northern hemisphere will get a dazzling look at the Perseid meteor shower in the early hours of Thursday morning. NASA says the Perseids are the best meteor showers to observe. Be sure to tune in to CNN's special coverage of the total solar eclipse at 1 o'clock Eastern. That's 10 o'clock here on the West Coast. Coverage will also be available on the CNN app. Thanks so much for joining us for the last 3 hours of The Story Is. I'm Alex Michelson. CNN Newsroom with Polo Sandoval is next after a quick break. And
hey everybody, and welcome to CNN Newsroom. I'm Polo Sandoval live in New York, and we are in the early hours after Election Night in America, but we still don't know the results of a high-stakes primary in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. Throughout the night, CNN has been closely following the Democratic primary for Wisconsin's governor. That's happening between Democratic Socialist Francesca Hung and Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. Now, the margin you see there, it has been razor thin for almost, really most of the night. But Crowley seems to be edging out a lead, at least for now, with this new batch of votes that was counted just in the last hour. But that's just one of the many races happening across 6 states, and that includes South Carolina. The special Republican Senate primary there will go to a runoff, and that after no candidate got a majority of the vote. CNN projecting that Darlene Graham, the sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, and Congressman Ralph Norman will be competing in that runoff in just 2 weeks' time.
I want to thank Republican voters of South Carolina for having confidence in me. I look forward to the next 2 weeks, meeting with you, listening to your concerns, and telling you more about me and my conservative values.
Our political experts standing by for a live discussion in a few moments. But first, let's go to CNN's Jeff Zeleny, who has more on the Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor.
This Democratic gubernatorial primary here in Wisconsin heads into a bit of an overtime. There's an open question here about the progressive support for Francesca Hung. As she addressed her supporters, she certainly did not declare victory, but she said the movement will go on.
Wisconsin, we have built something that will change politics forever. The work we have done will be remembered forever. I know we don't have the final results right now, but what I do know is that we are ready to keep fighting.
Now, she also did not talk about her Democratic rival, David Crowley, who's been watching these returns all evening long from Milwaukee. And it is those votes in Milwaukee that could hold the key to this race. But there is no doubt that the progressive insurgency movement that many expected to come together in Wisconsin did not happen. A very close contest with David Crowley. Many other candidates in the race actually also impacted this. This has been a wild Wisconsin governor's race. Candidates dropped out of the race. David Crowley did as well. He got back into the race, trying to slow Francesca Hung's candidacy. So these questions of electability that really hung over this race in the end, led by Governor Tony Evers, who was supporting Crowley, and he urged voters to take a very close look at this race. It looks like the voters did look at this race very closely. So this is still a very narrow race. It may not be called until Wednesday.
All right, thanks to Jeff Zeleny as we wait for that counting to continue. And potentially a projection? Let's go to our political panel. With me now from Atlanta is political and legal commentator Madeline Somerville. And also joining us is Republican strategist Katie Frost, who's the current chair of the Georgia Republican Party 3rd District. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for staying up late with me.
Thank you for having us.
Madeline, let's start with you. What do the numbers out of Wisconsin tell you about this battle between a Democratic Socialist candidate, Francesca Hong, and her establishment-backed opponent, David Crowley, who, according to the numbers right now, seems to be holding on to that narrow lead?
So I actually expected David Crowley to be coming out better than he is right now. And that's because we had so much chaos with the dropping out, the endorsing, right? I thought that, perhaps people would just have to default to the DSA candidate, but she does have a lot of chaos around her too. So I think that the voters showed us what they were going to do, and it didn't end up making sense in the end.
Crowley just about 3,200 votes ahead. That certainly speaks to that deep division within the party itself. Katie, do you think that division could translate to a possible advantage for Republican Tom Tiffany come November?
Well, it absolutely can when you look at turnout, because if you are a young voter who is inspired by Francesca Hong and you are working hard to get her elected, and then you see what feels like the establishment putting their finger on the scale for David Crowley, getting him back into the race after he's dropped out, Governor Evers going around the state campaigning with him, you're going to feel like, do they even care about my vote? Does my vote matter? Why am I going to show up for them when they did everything they could to keep my candidate from winning? So Crowley's going to have to make sure he gets that base to turn out in the general election. But I got to tell you, this has been a wild year. As someone who loves politics and loves studying all of these primaries, the way some of these candidates have ended up on the ballot, whether it's David Crowley, Troy Jackson, or even Darlene Graham, it's definitely been a fun year to watch.
Yeah, they really are, especially given just the unpredictable nature of one primary after another. And Madeline, for Wisconsin Democrats, just looking into a potential outcome here, I mean, how risky would it be to put Hong against the Republicans in a general election? Or do you think that a best case scenario would include Crowley advancing to November?
So I actually do think that a best case scenario would be Crowley advancing to November, but I think it's extremely risky for Hong to be moving forward, and the Democratic establishment knows that. However, the establishment is going to throw their weight and their funds behind whichever candidate could possibly beat the candidate that's endorsed by Donald Trump. Tom Tiffany is MAGA through and through, and I'm sure that President Trump will be very happy to see him in Congress, in the governor's seat. But here with Francesca Hong in Wisconsin has been one of the deciding states for years for the presidency. And if it turns out that Francesca takes the seat, it might be that the DSA is more powerful than I thought they were.
I mean, that certainly would be one way of looking at it. And we've seen Hong greatly scrutinized for her previous comments. I mean, that is nothing compared to what we would see come November, especially when that midterm approaches. I wonder if we can maybe shift gears, Katie, and talk Minnesota's GOP contest for the race for governor. Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, lost his primary. What's your takeaway from this latest loss of a Trump-backed candidate?
Well, I would say Mike Lindell is not your typical Trump-backed candidate. He is someone who is a larger-than-life figure, and he has his own persona completely separate from having that endorsement. So if you want to look at the power of President Trump's endorsement, frankly, Mike Lindell is not the best person to look for that. I would point you to Darlene Graham for the power of President Trump's endorsement. Here we have someone who was appointed just a matter of weeks ago. No one was really very familiar with her, and now she's coming in first against two sitting members of Congress. That speaks to the power of President Trump's endorsement. When you look at Minnesota, everyone knows Mike Lindell. Everyone has an opinion of Mike Lindell. And he was someone who really did not have much of a background in politics. This is his first time trying to run. And people already formed their opinions about him. They are running that is, of course, a state that leans blue, has swung at different times, but it does have tendencies to lean blue. So the voters there are going, we need a competitive candidate in the general election. not unlike what Democrats in Wisconsin are feeling about David Crowley versus Francesca Hong.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm glad you mentioned South Carolina. If we do have the numbers, let's just check in on what that final tally was when it comes to Darlene Graham leading with a little under 33%, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, we could put those numbers back up of the vote. And this is with support of the president and certainly with the support of the base of her late brother, Senator Lindsey Graham. You see there, 32.7% up against Ralph Norman, who trailed at 24.6. Katie, with all those other factors, though, is it surprising to you that that number wasn't higher?
Not especially, because, this is something else that's going to come down to turnout. They just had a primary and a runoff in South Carolina. Now they needed voters to show up a third time. Darlene Graham had $1.8 million spent on her behalf. Ralph Norman, who just come off a statewide run for governor, only had $200,000 spent on his behalf, but he still had a strong showing. The real person to watch right here is Russell Fry. What does he do as an endorsement? He clearly wants to be in the Senate. So is he going to look at this and try to decide, does he get behind one of the two candidates? Which one is less likely to serve a long time? He could be a kingmaker here. So that's the thing to watch.
And as you both know, Tuesday also brought the latest sign that President Trump could potentially assert control of the 2026 midterm elections. Let's just briefly play a part of the president's conversation with a conservative host that pitched the idea of declaring a national security emergency. And as you hear there, the president not ruling it out.
If they never get the Save America Act done, you have the right to declare a national security emergency for elections.
Let me just say that stranger things have happened. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Madeline, as an attorney, let me go to you. Would such a move even be constitutional? And what are the legal concerns you have off the bat?
So whenever President Trump makes a legal decision, I expect him to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And that is a strategy that you can move forward with if you want to try to institute something, do something for the first time. And that's what President Trump has done many times, right? Like with his immigration policies or even with the ballroom, right? We're not going to check and see if it's legal. We have a legal theory. We know we have one that we can advance if we move this to the courts and we get challenged. And I think, as you pointed to here, right, he has a legal theory and he wants to move forward with it. But I think that the part that frustrates me the most is that he discredits a judge when he doesn't like the judge's ruling, rather than saying this is or isn't against the law. He doesn't respect the decision. And so I think moving forward, what he will say is this is unsettled law. We don't know how the court's going to feel about this until we give them a chance to. But it's safe for us to expect that no matter what, if they don't agree with him, that he's going to keep challenging it, whether that's in court or in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, well, we saw immediately that this is certainly raising some concerns, to say the least. But nonetheless, we'll see how that pans out. CNN did, by the way, reach out to the White House to try to get a little bit more on the president's position on that. Madeline Somerville, Katie Frost, always grateful to you both for offering your perspectives. Always looking forward to talking to you. Come back again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it is a race against time following the largest earthquake to hit Colombia this decade. Recovery teams, they are looking for victims beneath the rubble, and this after dozens of buildings collapsed in several major cities on Monday. The U.S. says that it has sent a disaster assistance response team to the region, hoping to help support those efforts. And Mexico is currently preparing a large shipment of humanitarian aid, along with 255 specialized search and rescue troops. And these are the images that offer some glimmers of hope as they continue to emerge, as communities rally in support. Here you're seeing a woman who was rescued alive after being trapped beneath the rubble for about 36 hours in the debris of a collapsed hotel. And then we want to show you this other amazing video here, a baby being rescued in the hard-hit city of Cali. Earlier, CNN spoke with the volunteer who says that he was led to that specific spot by the whispers of a survivor in the rubble.
It sounded like a whisper. Yes, I'm here. I'm with a baby. but it was like a very soft whisper. So I said, silence, silence, because the noise from the girl and everything from the people who were there at the moment, who were the neighbors from the area, they all went quiet. And thanks to the cries of the person, the man who was shouting that he was with the baby, I was able to identify where he was. And that's when I started to act. There is a person at home with a baby, Beckham. So they started coming closer. We began moving some very large pieces of rubble, really heavy ones. We started moving debris, and there was a piece of the building slab that had fallen, quite wide, very large. The 7 of us tried, but on the first attempt, we couldn't lift it. Unity is strength, because no one person alone could have lifted that piece of rubble. It was so large and so heavy. Let's say that at that moment, it was about taking the initiative. And thanks to that, I would say that was the greatest contribution I made, taking the initiative.
And there have now been more than 70 aftershocks since Monday's initial 7.4 magnitude quake. It's estimated that at least 224 people have been killed. CNN Stefano Pozzebon has more on the widespread damage in the region.
We're really seeing scenes of complete chaos coming out of Colombia. The country has been impacted by a 7.4 magnitude earthquake, which is the strongest it recorded in over a decade. And among the places most impacted is the international airport in Pereira. You can see travelers seeking cover and running for their lives as the roof was collapsing on top of them. Pereira is a city in the known region of the coffee-growing region of Colombia. Another city close by is Manizales, where the clock tower of the cathedral is tilting. The quake lasted for almost a minute, and the damage that was impacted on the church and the surrounding building was significant. This national disaster is already creating an early challenge for the newly sworn-in president, Abelardo de la Espriella, who has called for an emergency meeting of the cabinet and for resources to be made available for first responders. He was only sworn in on Friday, and when the quake hit at 7:30 a.m. local on Monday morning, was meant to be his first day on the job.
All right, thanks to Stefano Pozzebon for that. And the Latino community in Miami currently stepping up to support those ongoing relief efforts. You see part of that effort right now. Colombian and Venezuelan volunteers in Miami, they're already organizing some of these shipments for those affected by the disaster.
It hits on for me because Colombia is a country neighbor, and we will always be there for them, like they were here for us when Venezuela earthquake happened. And like I said before, whatever they need, we are going to be there for them because they're like our brothers.
Yeah, Venezuelans all too familiar with the deadly potential of these earthquakes. If you want to help, you can get more information by going to cnn.com/impact. We'll be able to direct you to some of the resources available. And still to come here on CNN Newsroom, we'll have more on how the Secret Service moved President Trump off Air Force One and into another aircraft in Turkey without anyone noticing. Stay with us. And welcome back. We are closely watching election results coming out of Wisconsin at this hour, where the Democratic primary for governor remains a very tight race. And this after a delay. Milwaukee has already reported nearly 25,000 votes, which was the largest batch of votes that was still outstanding. And so far, Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley winning about 39% of the votes, netting about 1,200 votes over State Assembly member Francesca Hong. You see that that's with about 98% of the votes counted. Let's get more perspective now and head over to Stephen Olikar. He's a former U.S. Senate candidate in Wisconsin. He's also a senior fellow for political reform at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, as well as the founding CEO of Bridge Entertainment Labs. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Polo. Great to see you.
Of course. Stephen, we know it's a very long night here. What do you make as a former Democratic candidate in the state of Wisconsin? What do you make of the numbers? I mean, it was not supposed to be as close a race as it's turning out to be.
Yeah, Polo, this is an upset of the upset as David Crowley is on the verge of making a major comeback. So Francesca Hong, she's a Democratic socialist who came in as an underdog to be the front runner in this race, running on a far left agenda, but also taking on AI data centers. That became one of her signature issues, really built quite a following around that. But as there is a shakeup in the race, 2 lieutenant governors dropped out. David Crowley came back into the race after having suspended his campaign. And the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, took a massive political swing in not only endorsing Crowley, but campaigning with him. And they were on a massive barnstorming across the state over the last week and a half. And tonight we stand at a point where David Crowley is likely on the verge of making history and will have massive implications, not just for this fall, but also for 2028.
So if David Crowley does in fact advance to the primary, Stephen, just curious if you can give us a preview of what that matchup would look like. I mean, what would make him, as we heard just a few minutes ago from some of our other political experts, what would make him more of an ideal scenario for Wisconsin Democrats versus Hong?
Well, instead of having a race that was about cultural issues like canceling Thanksgiving and abolishing prisons that I think would startle a number of voters in the middle who come out to vote in the general election but may not vote in primaries, the entire structure of the race has now changed, likely, if Crowley pulls off this win, where it now focuses on economic issues and affordability because President Trump is underwater on economic issues. His Iran war is extremely unpopular. The MAGA brand, according to the latest polling in Wisconsin, is about 15 to 20 points underwater. And so now this will be a little bit more of a referendum on the Trump administration, but also David Crowley being able to talk about his record as Milwaukee County executive. He has built a reputation as someone who's been able to reduce homelessness in the county. The Journal Sentinel has done a lot of reporting on that in the state. And so he's going to be able to talk about more of these pocketbook issues as to some of the more far-out cultural issues that would have been the case with Francesca Hong. So now this is just a massive political earthquake tonight, Polo, because the race for governor now has changed from being an advantage for the Republicans if Hong pulls it off to now likely an advantage for Democrats with David Crowley poised to win tonight.
We haven't yet heard from David Crowley yet. We saw at his campaign headquarters essentially taking down the stage, potentially waiting for a few more hours when they have a better sense. What did you make, though, of Hong's statement when she addressed some of her supporters late Tuesday night?
Well, first, the energy going into the room, this was at a music hall in Madison, Wisconsin, was just off the charts, just absolutely electric because the Hong campaign was positioned to make history. There had never been a Democratic Socialist nominee for governor, and she really built a movement of young people and liberals across the state. But then people started to notice the race was changing and she wasn't pulling the numbers she needed to deliver in Madison, which is her home base. And so when she came out on stage, she didn't concede, but it sounded like a concession speech. She didn't have the energy of someone who felt like she was going to win. I think she was probably processing in real time this incredible turn of events. Now, David Crowley, he was waiting for the Milwaukee ballots to drop. There were some outstanding, about 28,000 outstanding absentee ballots. Those have now been processed and they've gone in Crowley's favor. But I think was too late for him to do a speech. So look in the morning for him to deliver a speech. David Crowley is an extraordinary communicator. And so I encourage people to tune in because I think he will basically lay out his case for the general election. And then there will be a unity breakfast that actually is now turning into a brunch for Democrats to show that they're united as they go into the general election.
Yeah, my colleague Alex, who I know you had some great conversations with in the last hour, put it best. I mean, there's a lot we're going to be learning about him in the next few hours, especially once we get to hear from him. Stephen Olikara, thank you so much for staying up late for us and continuing with your analysis as we wait for a potential projection coming out of Wisconsin.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Welcome to Wisconsin politics, Polo. It's a little wild.
I do love the great state of Wisconsin. Thanks again, Stephen.
My pleasure.
All right, the U.S. president says that Iran would, quote, get blown away if it tries to do something in the Strait of Hormuz. And this comes as Donald Trump insists that the U.S. still has total control over the critical waterway. Meanwhile, Trump administration officials there are warning of higher oil and gas prices into next year. And the latest shakeup in Iran's military leadership could be a sign that Tehran and Washington are far from striking a deal. Iran's supreme leader reportedly appointing 6 hardliners to top security positions this week. And we're learning new details about the covert operation to get President Donald Trump on a secret flight out of Turkey, with the New York Times now reporting that the U.S. had identified a threat of an Iranian assassination plot, which included a surface-to-air missile targeting Air Force One. And President Trump spoke about that secret plane swap on Tuesday night. Here's what he said on the tarmac.
It's only up to Secret Service. I just follow what they'd like to do. So I go by Secret Service and the military. They wanted me to go on a different flight, a different plane, equal safety, but they wanted me to do it, so I do it. I do what they say. Well, I don't know. I think actually the plane that I flew on was at greater risk. I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for. I don't worry about anything, to be honest. Whatever it is, you know my attitude, whatever.
So how did this covert switch play out? Well, U.S. official tells CNN that after boarding Air Force One in front of the cameras that day, last month, President Trump secretly exited the aircraft via a catering truck and then rushed him into a smaller military plane for that first leg of the return home. You could see reporters at the rear of that aircraft boarding, not knowing that the president had been moved and unknowingly flying on a decoy plane. CNN's Kevin Liptak has more on what we know about this ruse and how it was pulled off.
At 7:54 p.m., preparations get underway at the Ankara airport to execute the subterfuge. You can see in this video, airport catering trucks begin getting into position at the side of the blue and white Legacy Air Force One that Trump said he was using to return to Washington. At 8:24 p.m., Trump's motorcade arrives to the tarmac. As it speeds towards Air Force One, another smaller plane, a C-32A, is parked nearby. This shot is the best vantage of how the two planes are positioned on the tarmac. As the motorcade rounds the corner, you can see the two catering trucks at the side of the jumbo jet lifted up on hydraulics to doors on the right side of the plane. A few minutes later, Trump climbs the staircase and waves before entering his cabin. You can see the catering truck right there beneath the fuselage. At the back of the plane, reporters and staff line up to get on board. Once they're in their seats, the Secret Service tells them to keep their window shades down. Agents even come to the cabin, which faces out toward the smaller C-32A, to make sure all the shades are lowered. And this is when the shell game begins. A U.S. official says Trump was whisked off the plane and into a waiting catering truck. At 8:28 p.m., you can see a man in a suit climbing into the truck's cab. The container is lowered and the truck pulls out a minute later. The truck drives away from the bigger plane across the tarmac and pulls up to the C-32A. By zooming in, you can see it right there behind the engines. A person in a suit steps out of the cab, walks to the stairs, and gets on board. The bigger plane, now without the president on board, takes off at 8:44 p.m., passing right past the smaller plane with Trump inside. The smaller plane taxis away a minute later. As for the third plane, the Boeing 747 donated by Qatar, which Trump has been using in the U.S. and actually flew to Turkey on, it departed a few hours earlier, which can be seen here with the other two planes. Trump claimed at the time he wanted to show it off to troops in England. Flight tracking data shows that former Qatari jet landed at Mildenhall Air Force Base in the United Kingdom at 6:26 p.m. local time. It bore the call sign SAM-33, short for Special Air Mission. 40 minutes later, the Legacy Air Force One plane, the blue and white one, appears on radar near Istanbul with no call sign. Tracking data shows that as it flies over Romania, the plane begins using the call sign AF-1 for Air Force One, though the president was not on board. It lands at Mildenhall at around 10:29 p.m. local time. The smaller plane, the one Trump is actually on, doesn't show up on publicly available flight trackers, but video from YouTube shows it landing at Mildenhall at around the same time as the bigger plane. We don't know exactly how Trump moved from the smaller plane to the bigger one, but it took about 20 minutes for reporters to get off the plane once it had touched down, plenty of time for President Trump to sneak back on board. By 10:56 p.m., Trump can be seen descending the stairs of the Legacy Air Force One, this time in view of the cameras. He walked across the tarmac slowly, back to the Qatar jet for the flight home to Washington. On the way home, he was asked about some of the unusual security precautions.
Because you're probably on a dangerous flight because of the sleaze bags that we have to deal with. But if I go, you go. Right?
But was there a specific
perhaps someday you want to change professions.
Mr. Secretary, did you put Americans at risk by having them fly an Air Force One when it was under threat? How persistent is that threat to the president?
And that was Jennifer Hensler asking and getting ignored by the Secretary of State about whether the Trump administration put reporters and other Americans aboard the presidential jet at risk. Since revelation, the White House Correspondents Association is pressing the administration to establish protocols for handling such security issues in the future. Now to a former U.S. Marine that's been held in Russia, who's now back on American soil. That's where he will be receiving medical care. Robert Gilman was released from detention on Tuesday after warnings that he had suffered torture and was near death. He had been detained since 2022 and disputed those charges. CNN's Jennifer Hensler with more.
U.S. Marine veteran Robert Gilman was released from Russian detention on Tuesday after more than 4.5 years after mounting concerns around his health. Gilman was released on humanitarian grounds, according to both U.S. officials and a Russian official. The U.S. official said nothing was exchanged or given to secure Gilman's release. Now, President Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that he had spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the matter, and Putin had agreed to free him. Trump also said that he spoke with Gilman on his way back to the United States and that Gilman had, quote, one request, a really great cheeseburger, when he landed back in the U.S. Now, his ability to speak with the president was a promising initial sign given the massive concerns around his health. However, a picture posted by both Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio showed Gilman as incredibly gaunt, and a source told CNN that he was non-ambulatory, meaning that he wasn't able to necessarily stand up or walk on his own. After arriving back in the U.S., Gilman is expected to be treated at a military hospital in Texas, where his family will also meet him. There have been mounting concerns around Gilman's health, especially in recent weeks. An advocate for the family told CNN that he was subjected to psychological and physical torture while he was detained in Russia, and that more than 6 weeks ago he had slipped into a dissociative stupor. His family was concerned that they might not ever see him alive. Gilman's sister, Lexi Hudson, said in a statement on Tuesday that she was incredibly grateful that her brother was on his way back to the United States. Her statement said in part, quote, "There is no other reason that Robert is alive today other than that President Trump heard about the case and took action." She also thanked Senator Ed Markey for his work on those case. Jennifer Hensler, CNN, the State Department.
And we do continue to follow election results coming out of Wisconsin at this hour, where the Democratic primary for governor is perhaps, it could be, getting closer to a projection. We're going to have much, much more in a moment. Stay with us. You're watching CNN Newsroom.
This is CNN Breaking News.
It is 2:38 a.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and CNN can now project that Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will win the Democratic nomination in the race for the governor's mansion in that state. This means that Crowley will be the one to face off against Republican Tom Tiffany come the general election. And this has certainly been a tight race from the very beginning, as he was facing up against fellow Democrat Francesca Hong. So what does this race, what will this race look like for the next few months? Let's go to Richard Johnson, who's a senior lecturer in U.S. politics at Queen Mary University of London. He joins me from Oxford, England. It's great to see you again, Richard, with the breaking news now that CNN now projecting that David Crowley, as expected in the last couple of hours, will be the one to advance to the general election. What is your initial reaction? Any surprise?
This is a huge upset. If you look at the polls leading up to this race, Hong was leading Crowley in most of the polls by as many as 20 percentage points, with 10 or fewer percentage of voters undecided. And so this is a real polling miss that actually reminds me of what we saw last week with the Michigan Senate race, where there Haley Stevens nearly defeated Abdul El-Sayed, which was unexpected. And it's in both cases, we see a pattern where the more moderate candidate, Stevens in Michigan and Crowley in Wisconsin, are far overperforming their polling. And polling it's a very difficult exercise. We still don't quite know why the polls are so far off. I have a couple of thoughts on that. One might be that we see greater enthusiasm from more left-leaning Democrats to participate in polls. So that would be a kind of response bias as to who fills out or responds to a poll. The other is about weighting turnout. And that may be what we're seeing here. It's very difficult when you're doing a poll to estimate different groups in the electorate as to who's going to actually turn out. It's one thing for them to say they'll vote for a candidate. The other thing is, are they going to show up? And I wonder if the pollsters in Michigan and Wisconsin have quite substantially underestimated the turnout of more moderate Democrats.
As the more conventional Democrat, Richard, what does facing David Crowley mean for the Republican Party as a whole?
Well, Wisconsin it's a purple state. It's a state that has flipped back and forth between Democrats and Republicans at presidential level. And it's also a state which has elected Republicans to statewide office in recent years. Wisconsin had a very famous Republican governor, Scott Walker, who pursued really quite a conservative policy agenda. And Democrats tried to recall Scott Walker on a couple of occasions and was unable to do that. Those elections are often fought in Wisconsin on a knife edge. Wisconsin's also seen highly competitive state Supreme Court elections, which have been decided on a knife edge. And I do wonder if what we're seeing here in this victory for David Crowley is the argument of electability over ideological purity. Is it the case that Democrats wanted a winner who could defeat the Republicans, and that's what mattered more to them than whether or not Crowley had signed up to some of the more kind of left-leaning positions on, say, ICE or defunding the police?
Going to Francesca Hong, I mean, what do you think that Democratic socialists are taking away from this, Richard, especially for when it comes to that segment of the party and its future?
Well, I thought it was very interesting seeing the response of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders to Francesca Hong's candidacy, which was to say that they didn't want to get involved in this race, which is quite different from some of the other cases where Sanders was very happy to endorse El-Sayed. There's been an important contest in Minnesota with Peggy Flanagan, and Sanders was willing to endorse there, but not here in Wisconsin. And I think with Hong, she clearly did have some flaws as a candidate. Particularly some of the comments that she had made. There'd been a lot that had been made about this comment she made in 2020 about cancelling Thanksgiving, which came back to haunt her, probably somewhat of a trivial point. But I think what it perhaps shows for the Democratic Socialists is the importance of vetting their candidates and making sure that their candidates aren't going to have past statements that then become a weight around their neck in the campaign, particularly if these contests are going to be fought on such narrow margins. You don't really have room for error in these kinds of contests at the moment for the Democratic Socialists.
Do you expect Francesca Hong appearances on the campaign trail for the next couple of months?
Well, look, I mean, I heard earlier on there's your previous guest was talking about there being a unity breakfast or maybe a brunch. Now the results are coming out really quite late in the US. Some people want to catch up on some of their sleep. But look, I think the nature of partisanship in the United States is at the moment so strongly almost tribal that I sort of have a bit of a working theory that it doesn't matter a great deal who the parties put forward as their nominees. It can make a difference on the margins and in close races, like potentially the one we might see in Wisconsin, that could make a difference. But generally speaking, people who identify with the party, people who are committed Democrats, are going to come out and support the Democratic nominee, whoever that may be. And so Crowley is not some kind of, he's not a conservative. Crowley is a sort of middle of the road Democrat who signed up to, climate justice and all these kind of other issues that Democrats expect candidates in this day and age to believe in. It's just that on some of the other issues, particularly the kinds of positions that some candidates were taking during the pandemic about defunding the police and abolishing ICE and so on, he's been a bit moderated in his message. But I don't think that would prevent Democrats from coming out and voting for him in November. So I don't see an issue with Hong campaigning for him. I don't think he's taken any positions that would stop her from campaigning for him.
Sure, without a doubt. I'm sure we're going to see plenty of support for those in the progressive movement supporting David Crowley in a few months' time. Richard Johnson, always grateful for your political analysis. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
David Crowley securing the Democratic nomination in the state of Wisconsin in the race for governor. And with that, we'll be right back. A quick recap of our breaking news that we're following at this hour. CNN projecting Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will win Wisconsin's Democratic primary for governor. He had been locked in a tight race with State Assembly member Francesca Hong. Crowley will be facing Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, who has been endorsed by President Trump. Well, the U.S. inflation report for July is set to be released in just a few hours. Economists are looking to the Consumer Price Index data for more guidance on whether inflation is cooling or remaining sticky. Early estimates are for annual inflation to go down a tick from 3.5% in June to 3.4% in July. A decrease is also expected for core CPI, which strips out energy and food prices. The surge in energy prices due to the war with Iran has raised expectations for higher Fed rates by year's end. But the market remains divided on trying to figure out the Fed's next move and also the timing of any potential rate hikes. Well, many eyes will be looking up to the skies pretty soon, hopefully with some protective glasses, though. And this is a total eclipse stretches across parts of Europe. We'll tell you more in a moment. I want to get you back to our top story that we're following at this hour. CNN can now project that Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will be the one to win Wisconsin's Democratic primary for governor. He had been locked in a tight race with State Assembly member Francesca Hong. Crowley will be facing Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, who does have the support of President Donald Trump. Now to powerful storms across the Midwestern United States and mid-Atlantic that have left over 1 million people without power and at least one person dead. The system has triggered flash flooding, thunderstorms, and tornado warnings. Wind gusts over 75 miles per hour were recorded from northeastern Iowa to northern Indiana. And parts of Chicago saw hurricane-force winds over 90 miles per hour that knocked down some trees and power lines there. And multiple rounds of storms are expected in the same areas over the next few days, but conditions should ease up by this weekend, according to forecasters. Well, the celestial sky will be putting on quite the show over the next few days. First up, a total solar eclipse that's set to cross over Iceland, Greenland, Spain, and Russia. For about 2 minutes, the moon will line up just perfectly with the sun, plunging several countries into darkness. And in a rare alignment, the northern hemisphere will be getting a dazzling look at a meteor shower in the early hours of Thursday morning. NASA says that the Meteor shower is best. It's going to be one of the best that you could observe. And be sure to tune in to CNN special coverage of the total solar eclipse, coverage starting at 1 p.m. Eastern in the U.S., at 6 p.m. for you folks in London, 9 p.m. for viewers in Abu Dhabi. Coverage will also be available. You can stream it on the CNN app. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Polo Sandoval in New York. I'll be right back with you with more of your headlines and more of the breaking news out of Wisconsin here on CNN Newsroom. Hey everybody, welcome to CNN Newsroom. I'm Polo Sandoval live in New York. Another election night in America has come and gone. We've got updates on the big races and finally a projected winner in Wisconsin. And President Trump is speaking out about his Air Force One shell game triggered by an Iranian threat, while he says he went along with it. And how scientists plan to use today's solar eclipse to test a new instrument that could change how they study the sun.
Live from New York, this is CNN Newsroom with Polo Sandoval.
All right, everybody, 4 a.m. here in New York, 3 a.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And after a very long night of ballot counting, CNN can now project Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will be the one to advance to the governor's race as after he secured the Democratic nomination for governor. He had been locked in a very tight race with State Assembly member Francesca Hung. Crowley had dropped out of the race in early June, but then re-entered just days later with the support of Wisconsin's outgoing governor. Well, later this year, he's set to face Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, who does have the endorsement of President Donald Trump. And we're also following races across 5 other states, including South Carolina. The special Republican Senate primary there will be going to a runoff, and this after no candidate secured a majority of the vote. CNN projecting Darlene Graham, the sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, and Congressman Ralph Norman will compete in that runoff election in just 2 weeks.
I want to thank the Republican voters of South Carolina for having confidence in me. I look forward to the next 2 weeks, meeting with you, listening to your concerns, and telling you more about me and my conservative values.
All right, let's go to Caroline Hellman, who is a Democratic strategist and professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College. She joins me live from Los Angeles. It's always great to see you, Caroline. Another long night of primary election results.
Yes, indeed. Great to see you, Polo.
So let's start with David Crowley. I mean, he went from being out of the race to getting back in the race and now being the one to advance to face off the Republican in the race for the governor of that state. What's your initial reaction, and what do you think this matchup will look like as he gets ready to face the Republicans come November?
Well, Crowley pulling it out is actually pretty surprising. Hung was so far ahead. Francesca Hung, the Democratic Socialist candidate, was so far ahead in the polls. You know, very similar to what happened in Michigan in the primary last week, although El Sayed was able to pull it out, Hung was not. I mean, she's polling well ahead, and then the centrist Democratic candidate ended up clinching the Democratic primary nomination moving forward. And I think, you know, it really comes down to one primary thing, which is electability. So even though a lot of voters may have told pollsters that they were supporting more the Democratic Socialist agenda, maybe it was some of the more inflammatory things that Hong said, but at the end of the day, they went with a candidate that was simply more electable.
This also reminded me of, you and I were talking not too long ago with the Stevens El Sayed primary race there. And then, you and I were discussing the lingering question now about how both campaigns would be able to unify their supporters against their Republican opponent. I'll pose the same question here. How do you see the David Crowley campaign uniting with some of the members of or at least Francesca Hong supporters? Is that pretty easy to do, you think?
I do think it's easy to do because as hard fought as these primary campaigns are, once you're headed into the general election, you have a unified opponent or villain, if you will, in the contemporary political age, we're really talking about villainizing opponents. And so I would imagine that it will not be an issue for these candidates to come forth and perhaps campaign together. What we see is this fight, right, for the soul of the Democratic Party, whether it's the centrists versus the Democratic Socialists, or in some case just the socialist label. Francesca Hong supporters were very vocal. She was popular in the state as a restaurateur who went from one location to the next, really doing, pressing the flesh. So even though she has lost this race, it was so close that Crowley will definitely need those votes headed into the general election. And when I talked about electability earlier, it's really, I think, a calculus where voters in Wisconsin and elsewhere, while these Democratic Socialists have very popular platforms in terms of universal health care and a number of other policies, at the end of the day, they're looking to see who is going to beat a Trump-backed Republican come the general election.
Do you see Democratic Socialists looking at Francesca Hong's performance and taking something away that they could lead them to reconsider their approach in future elections, you think?
I actually think that this was much more about the particular candidate. It was about Francesca Hong, who had talked about maybe not celebrating Thanksgiving, about defunding the police, about maybe abolishing the Senate. So she had taken these much more extreme positions, mostly in her online history. And so while she walked a lot of that back, you'll notice that she didn't get endorsements from Bernie Sanders or AOC, really the stars of the Democratic Socialist movement right now. And so I think when you see the victory of someone like Dr. El Sayed compared to Francesca Hong, it really maybe came down to that particular candidate not being able to distance herself enough from the so-called woke one agenda that AOC referenced earlier this week.
Yeah, Hong's stumbles, especially towards the tail end, really curbed that momentum that she had. You also talked about, just a little while ago, we may see from Republicans. Wisconsin Republicans did have their hopes on a race against Francesca Hong. How are you expecting them now to go after Crowley for the next several months?
I think their strategy is pretty clear, which is to essentially drag every Democratic candidate over into the Democratic Socialist camp, right? And paint them as being maybe more extreme than they are, and paint them as being out of touch with the electorate. It's a very successful strategy, I think, that we've seen, certainly in terms of a unified message from the Republican Party, which they tend to be very good at doing. And in this particular race, Polo, you point out that they wanted Tiffany to go up against Hong in this general election because they just thought he would have a much better chance. But at the end of the day, the money that the Republican Party threw in to support Hong's candidacy just didn't get her across the line. Those voters in Wisconsin are really looking, I think, forward to November and saying, yeah, I like her issues, even, maybe she didn't distance herself enough, but at the end of the day, they see Crowley as being maybe more electable running against a Trump-backed Republican.
Let the real race begin now in the state of Wisconsin. Caroline Hellman, as always, always look forward to your perspective and your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We're also learning new details about the covert operation to get President Trump on a secret flight out of Turkey last month. The New York Times reporting that the U.S. had identified a threat of an Iranian assassination plot, which potentially included a surface-to-air missile targeting the presidential jet. President Trump spoke about that secret plane swap on Tuesday night and said this.
It's only up to Secret Service. I just follow what they'd like to do. So I go by Secret Service and the military. They wanted me to go on a different flight, a different plane, equal safety, but they wanted me to do it, so I do it. I do what they say. Well, I don't know. I think actually the plane that I flew on was at greater risk. I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for. I don't worry about anything, to be honest. Whatever it is, my attitude, whatever.
So how did this covert switch play out? CNN's Elena Treen with those details.
CNN is learning of this elaborate ruse that the president and his team had designed to move him onto a separate plane back when he was traveling in Turkey for the NATO summit. Essentially, we see the president boarding the old Air Force One last month to leave that summit. That's what we were told, at least. But if you look closely, there was a catering truck that's highlighted under Air Force One. Minutes after stepping aboard the plane, a U.S. official told CNN that the president secretly moved into a truck in a clandestine move to protect him. Now, all of this was unfolding as journalists and even some White House staffers were still boarding the plane and were told that the president was on that plane as well. I can't say just how remarkable a operation like this is and how atypical and really unprecedented it is. I'd remind you that the president had initially traveled to that NATO summit in Turkey on the new Air Force One that was gifted to the president from Qatar last year. It had all the new bells and whistles that the president has loved to publicize. But then they learned that they were going to be taking an older plane, the former plane that was used for Air Force One when leaving Turkey, and then they would stop in the United Kingdom for a refueling stop before heading back to Washington. The president had initially said that the reason for that was because there were U.S. service members on the ground in England who wanted to go on board and tour the new Qatari jet. However, CNN had reported in recent weeks that it was actually because of a threat from Iran. We had also reported that Israel had briefed some of the president's team on this threat before departing, but it was not known that the president had taken a separate plane known as a C-32A, that is a military aircraft, and he had done so all in the way of decepting the media on board. I do think what this shows is just reflective of how serious and credible the White House believed these threats from Iran were. I also think it raises questions about the capabilities that Iran has to target the most secure plane in the world. I will say, in retrospect, hindsight is 2020, that when you're looking at some of the signs that had happened on the ground that day, there were some things that were suspicious. One of them had been, and we got this from the great reporters who sent their pool reports throughout the day while in Turkey, that staff on board the plane had asked reporters to lower the shades to their windows. Not something typical for flights like this. We also know that once the flight had landed in the UK for that refueling stop, they had also taken an unusually long amount of time to have press leave the back of the plane. Later, of course, you did see the shot of Trump deboarding the plane. So clearly they had brought him back onto the plane to see him exit. All to say, we have not gotten a confirmation from the White House, but we also have not gotten a denial to this. And I will note that in the past, we have seen some presidents be a little bit deceptive about their travel, but not to the extent of 4 weeks and really a month now, arguing that the president had traveled on a plane when he didn't. Elena Treen, CNN, the White House.
Joining us now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, Paulo. Thank you.
So I'm sure you've been following that reporting closely, and some of this latest round of reporting from the New York Times that now shows that during the president's trip to last month's NATO summit, U.S. intelligence learned of a threat that was essentially two-pronged, that there was a specific threat of a surface-to-air missile against Air Force One, or whatever aircraft the president was aboard, and then this one, that the Iranians knew specifically where Mr. Trump was staying in Turkey. So they covertly flew him out on that secret flight, as we all know, and as the president confirmed late Tuesday. But I'm more interested in just the seriousness of this threat. I mean, clearly the Secret Service considered it serious enough that they moved forward with this operation. So what does it tell you about Iran's capability in the region? I mean, the Trump administration has repeatedly asserted that Iran's regime has been severely debilitated.
Well, great to be with you. And it's a pretty crazy story because we're learning more as it really develops. The Washington Post and NBC, some pretty important exclusives and scoops on this. But ultimately, this is a story more about intention than capability. You know, this is a regime that has hired, guns for hire in the past to try to go against dissidents and foreign targets. But for many years now, they've been talking about actually wanting to kill the president. They've raised money. They've issued fatwas. They've issued threats officially and unofficially from government authorities and also from religious centers and media centers. But this story is a little bit different because clearly the Secret Service is acting on even the slight probability or the slight chance of the regime being able to do one of those two things. And the story that was reported by NBC and by the Washington Post about the president hiding in, a catering container and moving planes, for example, that too just tells you how seriously, government authorities and the Secret Service were taking it and not leaving things to a low probability, high impact chance.
And then on the reporting from the New York Times that the Iranians knew specifically where the president was staying in Ankara, including even the floor of the building, according to that reporting. Just how concerning is that to you? I mean, should that kind of information be easy to get, especially for the Iranians that have threatened the president in the past?
I mean, if at that granular level the Islamic Republic knows this, or its authorities or proxies or agents or guns for hire know it, it's a problem, and it's a problem because A, how did the information get out? B, was this inadvertently put out publicly and then removed? Or C, did they use local sources? And lest we forget, Turkey is a very permissive jurisdiction for Iran-backed intelligence activity and proxy activity. In the past, there have been, deportations of Turkey of political prisoners that were Iranian or refugees that were Iranian that actually folks worried about meeting a fate perhaps worse than death back in Iran. Inside of Turkey, of course, as you know, there's also been the long arm of Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So there's certainly some level of security state penetration by a neighbor of Turkey, which, by the way, is a NATO country. But to bring it back to what you mentioned earlier about the dichotomy between this long arm of Iran-backed terror, or this intentionality of doing something, and what the White House has long talked about, which is this diminishing capability, I think we're seeing two things quite quickly converge, which is that this can be a less capable regime, but it is still a pretty confident regime. And this is a regime that might be on the surface, on the macroeconomics of it, on the conventional military side, weak, but on the asymmetric side, quite lethal.
And given those abilities, then, just looking back at last month's visit to Turkey, do you think that the president should have accepted the Turkish president's invitation to attend that summit, considering everything you've just laid out?
Considering everything I said, certainly I think it's always wise to go to the territory of a NATO country, but perhaps it does underscore two things. One, the problems, of course, with the switcheroo, given the fact that the president had to board a different plane, and the fact that he actually boarded the Qatari newer Air Force One back when he was in London. So it shows, some of the initial concerns about that first plane were actually quite valid and quite true. And second, I would also say here, by the way, you don't want this to fit in the mind of any adversarial state that the territory of any NATO country is not a safe country to go to. But that being said, Turkey is not necessarily a NATO country in the best standing, given its kind of mixed foreign policy orientation of other issues that the rest of the alliance is pretty solid on. And here I'm not talking about Russian issues, I'm talking about Middle Eastern issues.
Ben Teleblue, thank you so much for joining us as always and providing all this analysis.
Thank you.
Well, the U.S. president says that Iran would, quote, get blown away if it tries to do something in the Strait of Hormuz. And this comes as Donald Trump insists that the U.S. still has total control over the critical waterway. Well, meanwhile, the Trump administration now warning of higher oil and gas prices into next year. The latest shakeup in Iran's military leadership, it could be a sign that Tehran and Washington are far from striking a deal. Iran's supreme leader reportedly appointed 6 hardliners to top security positions this week. Rescue teams across Colombia are racing to find survivors after Monday's devastating earthquake. Still ahead, a volunteer describes how crews were able to rescue a baby from the rubble. I check it now on election results, including out of the state of Wisconsin, where CNN is now projecting that Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will be winning the state's Democratic primary for governor. It had been a very tightly locked race between him and State Assembly member Francesca Hung. Crowley will now face Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany from the general election. To South Carolina now, where 2 Republican Senate candidates are advancing to a runoff after a special primary. It followed the death of longtime Senator Lindsey Graham. Well, his sister, Darlene, who was appointed to fill his seat, has now qualified for the August 25th runoff. She'll be facing off against Representative Ralph Norman in 2 weeks. All right, now to this developing story and the devastation across Colombia after the country was hit with the largest earthquake in a decade. Recovery teams are looking for victims beneath the rubble after dozens of buildings collapsed in several major cities on Monday. Well, the U.S. says that it has sent a disaster assistance response team to help support those efforts. Meanwhile, Mexico is preparing a large shipment of humanitarian aid, along with 255 specialized search and rescue troops. And then there are these glimmers of hope that continue emerging as communities rally in support. Here you see a woman who was rescued alive after spending 36 hours beneath the rubble of what was once a hotel. And this video showing a baby being rescued in the hard-hit city of Cali. Earlier, CNN spoke with a volunteer who says that he was led to that specific spot in the devastation, led there by whispers of a survivor.
It sounded like a whisper. Yes, I'm here. I'm with a baby. But it was like a very soft whisper. So I said, silence, silence, because the noise from the girl and everything from the people who were there at the moment, who were the neighbors from the area, they all went quiet. And thanks to the cries of the person, the man who was shouting that he was with the baby, I was able to identify where he was. And that's when I started to act. There is a person at home with a baby, Beckham. So they started coming closer. We began moving some very large pieces of rubble, really heavy ones. We started moving debris, and there was a piece of the building slab that had fallen, quite wide, very large. The 7 of us tried, but on the first attempt, we couldn't lift it. Unity is strength, because no one person alone could have lifted that piece of rubble. It was so large and so heavy. Let's say that at that moment, it was about taking the initiative. And thanks to that, I would say that was the greatest contribution I made, taking the initiative.
And CNN's David Culver is in Colombia, and one of the hardest hit cities. He gives us a closer look at the recovery efforts.
It's been hours in the relentless, scorching 90-degree plus heat. And you'll look around and you'll notice the vast majority of all these folks aren't officials, but they're volunteers. They believe there's still signs of life coming from within the rubble here. Pereira is a city of about 500,000, roughly the size of Minneapolis. The airport's damaged and closed, so getting here from Bogota took us 8+ hours.
The sun's just coming up. We've been driving all night.
Arriving, you find destruction spills into nearly every street in the city center. While much of the city is still standing, the facades have shattered onto the sidewalk or even onto parked cars. And amid the rubble, life and death.
She says as of last night, they had pulled out 7 bodies and 5 survivors from this collapse right here.
Another believed to be still inside this once hotel. At least they heard her voice 3 hours earlier.
He's asking, they need the machinery to be able to move this. They just don't have sufficient equipment to do it.
But until then, this city, known for how friendly its people are using their bare hands to clear the paths of destruction as time and heat is working against them. Hope, that's really is what motivates them to push forward.
All right, our thanks to David Culver and his whole team for reporting there from the devastation. Look for more of his reports, of course, in the hours ahead. And for more information on how you can help the earthquake victims in Colombia, go to cnn.com/impact. There are plenty of resources there. And up next here on CNN Newsroom, election results from the state of Wisconsin. CNN has now made a projection in the race between David Crowley and Francesca Hong in the Democratic primary for governor. Stay with us. And welcome back. We now have a projected winner in Wisconsin's Democratic primary for governor. CNN projecting that Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will win that race. He defeats State Assembly member Francesca Hong by a narrow margin. Crowley had dropped out of the race earlier, but later reactivated his campaign and grabbed the endorsement of the outgoing governor of that state, Tony Evers. Crowley will now face Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany come November. And as the news broke in the last hour, I spoke with Richard Johnson, a senior lecturer in U.S. politics at Queen Mary's University in London. I want you to listen to part of our conversation.
This is a huge upset. If you look at the polls leading up to this race, Hong was leading Crowley in most of the polls by as many as 20 percentage points, with 10 or fewer percentage of voters undecided. And so this is a real polling miss that actually reminds me of what we saw last week with the Michigan Senate race, where there Haley Stevens nearly defeated Abdul El-Sayed, which was unexpected. And it's in both cases, we see a pattern where the more moderate candidate, Stevens in Michigan and Crowley in Wisconsin, are far overperforming their polling. And polling it's a very difficult exercise. We still don't quite know why the polls are so far off. I have a couple of thoughts on that. One might be that we see greater enthusiasm from more left-leaning Democrats to participate in polls. So that would be a kind of response bias as to who fills out or responds to a poll. The other is about weighting turnout. And that may be what we're seeing here. It's very difficult when you're doing a poll to estimate different groups in the electorate as to who's going to actually turn out. It's one thing for them to say they'll vote for a candidate. The other thing is, are they going to show up? And I wonder if the pollsters in Michigan and Wisconsin have quite substantially underestimated the turnout of more moderate Democrats.
As the more conventional Democrat, Richard, what does facing David Crowley mean for the Republican Party as a whole?
Well, Wisconsin it's a purple state. It's a state that has flipped back and forth between Democrats and Republicans at presidential level. And it's also a state which has elected Republicans to statewide office in recent years. Wisconsin had a very famous Republican governor, Scott Walker, who pursued really quite a conservative policy agenda. And Democrats tried to recall Scott Walker on a couple of occasions and was unable to do that. Those elections are often fought in Wisconsin on a knife edge. Wisconsin's also seen highly competitive state Supreme Court elections, which have been decided on a knife edge. And I do wonder if what we're seeing here in this victory for David Crowley is the argument of electability over ideological purity. Is it the case that Democrats wanted a winner who could defeat the Republicans, and that's what mattered more to them than whether or not Crowley had signed up to some of the more kind of left-leaning positions on, say, ICE or defunding the police?
Going to Francesca Hong, I mean, what do you think that Democratic socialists are taking away from this, Richard, especially for when it comes to that segment of the party and its future?
Well, I thought it was very interesting seeing the response of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders to Francesca Hong's candidacy, which was to say that they didn't want to get involved in this race, which is quite different from some of the other cases where Sanders was very happy to endorse El-Sayed. There's been an important contest in Minnesota with Peggy Flanagan, and Sanders was willing to endorse there, but not here in Wisconsin. And I think with Hong, she clearly did have some flaws as a candidate, particularly some of the comments that she had made. There'd been a lot that had been made about this comment she made in 2020 about cancelling Thanksgiving, which came back to haunt her, probably somewhat of a trivial point. But I think what it perhaps shows for the Democratic Socialists is the importance of vetting their candidates and making sure that their candidates aren't going to have past statements that then become a weight around their neck in the campaign, particularly if these contests are going to be fought on such narrow margins. You don't really have room for error in these kinds of contests at the moment for the Democratic Socialists.
A former U.S. Marine held in Russia, now back on American soil, where he will be receiving medical care. Robert Gilman was released from detention on Tuesday, and this after warnings that he had suffered torture and was reportedly near death. He had been detained there since 2022 on disputed charges. CNN's Jennifer Hensler with more.
U.S. Marine veteran Robert Gilman was released from Russian detention on Tuesday after more than 4.5 years after mounting concerns around his health. Gilman was released on humanitarian grounds, according to both U.S. officials and a Russian official. The U.S. official said nothing was exchanged or given to secure Gilman's release. Now, President Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that he had spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the matter, and Putin had agreed to free him. Trump also said that he spoke with Gilman on his way back to the United States and that Gilman had, quote, one request, a really great cheeseburger, when he landed back in the U.S. Now, his ability to speak with the president was a promising initial sign given the massive concerns around his health. However, a picture posted by both Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio showed Gilman as incredibly gaunt, and a source told CNN that he was non-ambulatory, meaning that he wasn't able to necessarily stand up or walk on his own. After arriving back in the U.S., Gilman is expected to be treated at a military hospital in Texas, where his family will also meet him. There have been mounting concerns around Gilman's health, especially in recent weeks. An advocate for the family told CNN that he was subjected to psychological and physical torture while he was detained in Russia, and that more than 6 weeks ago he had slipped into a dissociative stupor. His family was concerned that they might not ever see him alive. Gilman's sister, Lexi Hudson, said in a statement on Tuesday that she was incredibly grateful that her brother was on his way back to the United States. Her statement said in part, quote, "There is no other reason that Robert is alive today other than that President Trump heard about the case and took action." She also thanked Senator Ed Markey for his work on this case. Jennifer Hensler, CNN, the State Department.
And still ahead here on CNN Newsroom, a New York State judge sets the start date for Luigi Mangioni's murder trial. What we learned out of his final expected court appearance before he goes to trial for after he's accused of the killing of the United Healthcare CEO. Well, after hours and hours of vote counting, CNN can finally project that Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will be the one to win Wisconsin's Democratic primary for governor. The race against progressive state assembly member Francesca Hong, a real nail-biter from the start. Crowley will now be facing Republican House Representative Tom Tiffany, who has been endorsed by President Donald Trump. Bipartisan lawmakers are pushing to pass a bill addressing reports that AI models are escaping testing environments and then hacking into outside computer systems. The AI Kill Switch Act would force companies to build safety features into their systems that would allow authorities to shut down models deemed harmful. Sponsors of the legislation are insisting that they are not trying to slow down the development of the technology, but they say that it needs more built-in control features, and this is that. A New York State judge has set out the schedule and some parameters for Luigi Mangioni's state murder trial in the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The trial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks, starting with jury selection scheduled on September 8th. CNN's Kara Scannell with a preview.
Luigi Mangione is back in court for his final pre-trial conference before he goes on trial for allegedly murdering the United Healthcare CEO in December 2024. At the hearing, the judge gave some direction on jury selection. He said that this jury in the case would be anonymous, meaning the public will not know the identities of the jurors who are selected. He also said that both sides should come together and come up with a bunch of questions that they want to ask the prospective jurors and let them know where they agree and where they disagree. The judge also noted there's intense media interest in this case. He said that there has been expressions of interest from more than 80 news organizations and media figures, and so there will be an overflow courtroom where members of the media and the public can come and watch the proceedings, where there will be audio and visual video of what's happening inside the courtroom. All of this leading up to jury selection beginning on September 8th, just a few weeks away. Now, if Mangione is convicted, he could face as much as life in prison. He has pleaded not guilty. Back to you.
Kara Scannell, thank you. An 18-year-old Arkansas woman has filed a federal civil rights complaint against a state trooper. Melissa Hackett says that he used excessive force during a traffic stop earlier this month. Now, warning that our report from Catherine Rowley of affiliate KTHV does contain graphic content.
What's the emergency?
My window is broke.
Arlano wrote that he could see a cold bottle of liquor in the car.
You trying to go to jail, ain't you?
If I wanted to go to jail, I would never stop. I wouldn't even study the alcohol limit.
While writing citations, Arlano called his sergeant who had stopped Hackett days earlier. Arlano wrote that the trooper had told him that Hackett had an open container of alcohol during that stop earlier. After that call, Arlano wrote that he decided a citation would not be enough and moved to arrest Hackett.
If she got an attitude, take her to jail.
Okay. All right, we'll do that.
The video shows Hackett asking why she is under arrest before the encounter escalates.
Yeah, let me get your left hand real quick.
Sir, what did I do?
Get your left hand real quick. Do not, look, do not resist, do not resist.
I need to call mama.
No, stop.
But I didn't. Sir, what am I doing? Oh, no!
Stop. About 10 seconds later, while he is kneeling over her, the video shows him punching Hackett in the face.
Fuck, turn around. Turn around. Turn around. Turn around.
In his use of force report, Arlano acknowledged that he delivered what he called one closed fist strike to the left side of Hackett's face. During the struggle, Hackett cried for help, asking to call her mother, and tells the trooper he cannot punch her.
Turn around!
You cannot punch me!
The video also shows Arlano drawing his taser and warning Hackett he will punch her again if she does not turn over. He does not fire the taser.
Well, that trooper is not on administrative leave, according to the Arkansas State Police, so there is an internal review that's underway. A part of the world will soon find itself in darkness during a total solar eclipse. Details on this rare celestial event and how it could change the way, really what we know about the sun. All right, now a quick update to our top stories. CNN projecting Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley will be the one to win Wisconsin's Democratic primary for governor. He managed to edge out State Assembly member Francesca Hong after holding on to a narrow lead for most of the evening. Hong had been a leading candidate, but some critics questioned whether she could beat out a Republican opponent to become next governor of the state. Crowley's next opponent, Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, who has the endorsement of President Donald Trump. Crowley's campaign manager just released a statement moments ago, reading in part, "The choice in November has always been clear. We should move Wisconsin forward with leadership focused on solving problems, or we can bring the division and extremism of Tom Tiffany and Donald Trump to Wisconsin." Well, more than 1 million Americans are without power as some intense thunderstorms sweep across the Midwest. A flash flood and tornado warnings are spanning from Chicago to the central Appalachians on Tuesday. Cheryl Hubbard with more.
Some Ohioans began cleanup efforts Tuesday afternoon after damaging winds tore through their neighborhood.
Huge winds. Branches obviously flying, snapping and falling. Kept hearing lots of popping.
But their efforts may be premature. A long-lasting line of storms is expected to continue to pound the region.
We have got storm after storm after storm lining up, one after another.
In this video from the Ohio Department of Transportation, one vehicle can be seen on Interstate 71 being blown over by powerful winds as other cars halt to a stop as the storm passes by. Hurricane-force wind gusts over 90 miles per hour were captured in parts of Chicago, and Columbus, Ohio experienced gusts over 80 miles an hour as storms tore through those areas. And weather experts clocked a storm known as a derecho from northeast Iowa to northern Indiana. Many of the same areas seeing intense storms are also at risk for flooding, with forecasters predicting more extreme rainfall over the next several days. Around 200 people in Perry County, Ohio were forced from their homes after floodwaters rose Tuesday. The state's governor is warning others that the worst may not be over and to remain vigilant.
We all do stupid things and we all make mistakes. This is not the time to do that.
Other powerful storms hit the central Appalachians, knocking out power to hundreds of thousands as the region faces a serious multi-day flash flooding threat. I'm Cheryl Hubbard reporting.
The celestial sky will be putting on quite the show over the next few days. First up, a total solar eclipse that's set to cross over Iceland, Greenland, Spain, and Russia. For about 2 minutes, the moon will line up just perfectly with the sun, plunging several countries into darkness. And in a rare alignment, the northern hemisphere will get a dazzling look at the Perseid meteor shower. In the early hours of Thursday morning, NASA says that the Perseids are actually the best meteor shower to observe, so don't miss it. And as people watch the eclipse through protective glasses, astronomers in Italy will also be looking skyward, testing a new instrument that could dramatically change how effectively the sun can be studied. Here's Rafael Romo to explain.
In northern Italy, researchers have created a new instrument they believe will be a game changer for studying the sun. Its big test is coming up Wednesday during the solar eclipse. The scientists worked on the circular slit spectrometer for 2.5 years, and it's designed to scan the corona, or the outermost layer of the sun's atmosphere, in minutes, unlike previous models that took hours.
This spectrometer is an innovative prototype featuring a completely new optical design, because unlike conventional spectrometers, which use a linear slit and a linear grating, it has a circular slit and can capture the spectrum of the entire corona at a certain distance from the center of the sun in a single photograph.
The solar eclipse on Wednesday will be visible to parts of the world, including northern Spain, where there will be totality. There, the Italian researchers will put their new tool to the test. The eclipse creates rare conditions where the corona is more visible than normal.
So the aim is to test the system, to demonstrate that this new operating principle works. This must be done during the eclipse, because otherwise we would not be able to see the corona. We would not be able to see the subject we are interested in observing.
Let's say that the difficulty, as with all innovative instruments, lies in the transition from the idea, from what one might expect, to the final realization of the pieces.
They have opted to drive about 1,600 kilometers rather than fly, so the instrument can travel safely and to avoid possible delays.
Traveling to Spain by road, let's say from a practical point of view, is easier at the moment because we can travel in a van with the equipment already fitted and simply check that the alignment has been maintained, rather than having to start the process all over again. What's more, given the current situation with flights, which may well be canceled at the last minute, it's best to make sure we actually get there.
If researchers can demonstrate the new tool works, it could be applied to future space missions and has the potential to significantly speed up studies of the sun. Rafael Romo, CNN.
Rod Stewart canceling the remainder of his farewell tour. The 81-year-old musician is recovering from a coronary stent procedure and says that he's taking the next few weeks to recuperate. Stewart canceled several dates earlier this year in Las Vegas and in the city of San Diego. The Grammy winner says that he is disappointed to be letting some of his fans down, but he's already feeling much better, he says, and he wants to return to the stage at some point. Wish him a speedy recovery. All right, now to the Powerball jackpot. It is now the highest it's been since December. The grand prize soaring to an estimated $1 billion. And this after nobody won Monday night's drawing. The next drawing happening Wednesday. Good luck. You'll split the winnings with me, I'm sure. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Polo Sandoval in New York. CNN Headline Express is next.